I was driving cross-country alone. The kind of trip you take when you don't really want to think too much. Long highways, empty stretches of land, and hours of nothing but the radio and your own thoughts. By the time the sun went down, I was exhausted, and my phone signal had been cutting in and out for miles. I wasn't picky, I just needed a bed. That's how I ended up at the motel. It sat off a nearly abandoned highway exit, one of those places that looked like it had survived by being forgotten. The sign flickered missing letters, the word motel buzzing softly in the dark. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, with only one other car parked near the office. I told myself places like this still existed everywhere, and that I was being dramatic because I was tired. The office smelled like dust and old carpet cleaner. Behind the counter was an older man watching a small television with the volume turned low. He didn't look surprised to see me, which felt strange considering how empty the road had been. I asked for a room, he nodded, barely glancing up, and slid a key across the counter. "Room 12, he said. I asked if there were any others available, mostly out of habit. He paused just a little too long before saying, "That's the one." Room 12 was at the far end of the building. As I walked toward it, I noticed something unsettling. Most of the other rooms looked unused, curtains drawn tight, some windows boarded from the inside. A few doors had numbers missing entirely. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have, like the place was amplifying sound just to remind me how alone I was. Inside, the room was normal. Too normal. Clean bed, folded towels, no dust on the surfaces. It felt less like an abandoned motel and more like a room waiting patiently for someone. I locked the door, set my bag down, and sat on the edge of the bed, finally letting my body relax. That's when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, careful, not passing by, stopping in front of my door. I froze, listening. After a moment, the steps moved on. I told myself it was the other guest, maybe going for ice or a smoke. Still, I checked the peephole. The walkway was empty. Later, trying to sleep, I heard movement again, this time inside the walls. Not scratching, not scurrying. Footsteps, like someone walking the length of the hallway, but muted, distant, wrong. Every time they reached the end, they stopped, right behind the wall at the head of my bed. I didn't sleep much. Sometime after 3 a.m., I heard knocking. 3 slow knocks. Firm, confident. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The knocking came again, closer somehow, even though it was clearly on the door. A voice followed, quiet, almost polite. "Front desk, just checking in." I stayed silent until the footsteps walked away. When morning finally came, pale and gray, I packed up fast and went straight to the office to check out. The old man was there again, same position, same low television volume. I slid the key across the counter and said I'd had a rough night. He nodded. People usually do in 12. I asked him what he meant. He finally looked at me, really looked at me. "That room hasn't been vacant in years. We just keep it ready." I left without asking anything else. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the motel online. There were no listings, no reviews, no website. But buried in an old local forum was a post from years ago, someone asking about strange noises in a roadside motel room. Room 12. The post ended with one reply. "If you stayed the night, it means the room wanted you. Be glad it let you leave." I've always been drawn to old libraries. The smell of leather, dust, and paper stacked high in endless rows. It's the kind of place where time feels suspended. That night, I was visiting a small college town for a conference. The main library had closed hours ago, but I noticed a small side entrance slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd just peek inside, maybe grab a quiet corner to organize notes before heading back to my hotel.
The moment I stepped in, the air changed. It was cooler than the night outside, but not uncomfortable. There was an odd stillness, almost too perfect, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The lights were dim, and the only sound was my footsteps on the worn wooden floor. I didn't see anyone else. I told myself I must have imagined the door being open and that someone else was working late. I wandered between the shelves, scanning the spines. Every book looked old, well-worn, carefully preserved. Then I realized I could hear soft noises, whispers, but no one was around. The whispers were faint, just beyond understanding, almost like a language I didn't know. My stomach tightened, but I rationalized it. Maybe it was the wind through the old building, some creaking of the structure. I kept walking, deeper into the library, when I noticed something unusual. A door I didn't remember seeing before, slightly recessed between two shelves. It was a small wooden door, no signage, just a brass knob that reflected the dim light. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a tiny room, almost like a study, lined with books from floor to ceiling. A single desk sat in the center with a chair facing away from me. Papers were stacked neatly, but everything seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial. I felt the hair on my neck rise. As I stepped closer, I heard a faint creak behind me. I turned, but the door I came through had disappeared. The shelves were continuous now. Panic started to creep in. I tried the other doors, windows, anything, but the exits were gone. The whispers grew louder, more coherent. They weren't random. They were calling my name. Every syllable deliberate, dragging the sound of my name out in a way that made my chest tighten. I ran down the aisles, trying to retrace my steps, but every turn led me back to the small room. The desk chair had turned slightly, as if someone or something had been sitting there, watching. I tried to breathe, tried to calm myself. The whispers became words. "You shouldn't be here. We've been waiting." Hours could have passed, or minutes. I have no sense of time. Eventually, I stumbled across a stack of books that seemed misplaced. Pushing them aside revealed the original side door. I didn't stop to think, I just ran through it and slammed it shut behind me. Outside, the street was empty, the night quiet, as if nothing had happened. I returned to the hotel, heart racing, and tried to rationalize the experience. The next morning, I went back to the library. The side door was locked tight. I asked the librarian about any small rooms tucked away inside. She looked at me with confusion. Nothing like that exists here, not even room 12. I've never stepped foot inside a library at night again. But sometimes, when I hear pages rustling or whispers in the distance, I feel that same cold pull, like the building itself remembers me, still waiting.
I didn't notice the first voicemail right away. It sat there unnoticed for almost a week, buried under spam calls and automated reminders. I only found it because I was clearing space on my phone late one night, half asleep, scrolling without really looking. The timestamp said it was left at 2:41 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was certain I'd been asleep at that time. The voicemail was only 8 seconds long. It was silent at first, just the faint sound of breathing. Then a voice whispered my name. My name. Not shouted, not rushed. Said carefully, like someone standing very close to the phone. I laughed it off at first. Pocket dial, prank. Maybe I'd rolled onto my phone in my sleep. Still, something about the breathing stuck with me. It sounded awake. The next voicemail arrived 2 nights later. This one was longer, about 30 seconds. It started with the same breathing, but this time I could hear background noise, a low hum like traffic far away, maybe a refrigerator motor. Then my voice spoke. I shouldn't have answered it. I felt cold all over.
It wasn't a recording I recognized. It wasn't distorted or edited. It was my voice exactly as I hear it in my own head, tired and slightly hoarse. The message ended abruptly, like the call had been cut off. I checked the call details. Unknown number. No callback option. I didn't sleep that night. I started checking my phone constantly. Every vibration made my stomach tighten. I turned on all the lights in my apartment, locked the doors, checked the windows twice. Everything was normal. Too normal. No signs of anyone else being there. No missing time. No outgoing calls in my history. The third voicemail arrived while I was awake. My phone buzzed at 2:41 a.m. exactly, same time as the first. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, watching the notification appear in real time. I didn't answer. I let it ring out. When it stopped, the voicemail icon appeared instantly, like it had been waiting. This one was over a minute long. My voice again, but closer this time, quieter. I was whispering urgently, like I was afraid of being overheard. I described my apartment in detail. The couch, the crooked picture frame I kept meaning to straighten, the way the hallway light flickered if you didn't screw the bulb in tight enough. Details no one else would know. Then I said, "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't fix it." At that point, I turned my phone off completely. The next morning, I went to my carrier store. They told me the calls weren't coming through their network at all. No origin point, no tower data. It was like the voicemails had been created directly on my device. They suggested a factory reset. I did it right there at the counter. For a while, things were quiet. No calls, no messages. I started sleeping again. I told myself stress had gotten to me, that I'd imagined the voice similarities, that fear can make your brain fill in gaps you don't want to see. Almost believed it. Then I found the fourth voicemail. It was dated 3 days in the future. I didn't open it right away. I sat on my bed staring at the timestamp, my pulse loud in my ears. When I finally pressed play, I was shaking. The message was short, just one sentence. "I'm running out of time." In the background, I could hear something new, my apartment door opening. I dropped the phone and ran to the hallway. The door was still locked. The chain was in place. Nothing had changed. I checked every room, every corner. Nothing. No one. Silence. That night, I didn't stay home. I drove until sunrise, parked in a crowded lot, and slept in my car. When I checked my phone in the morning, there was one final voicemail, time-stamped at 2:41 a.m. I almost deleted it without listening. Almost. My voice sounded calmer this time, resigned. "You're doing the right thing," it said. I stayed. That's where I messed up. The message ended with slow breathing, and then a click. I changed my number that day, moved apartments a month later. I don't answer unknown calls anymore. I don't keep my phone near my bed at night. Still, sometimes, when everything is quiet and the clock creeps towards 2:41 a.m., I swear I can feel my phone vibrating, recording something I haven't said yet. I started driving Uber at night because it paid better and because I liked the quiet. The city felt different after midnight, less rushed, more honest. Fewer people pretending, fewer conversations I had to fake. Most nights were predictable. Drunk passengers, tired nurses, the occasional airport run. I learned quickly that late-night riders fall into patterns, and patterns make long hours easier to handle. That night started like any other. I accepted a pickup just after 1 a.m., a short ride from a downtown apartment building to a residential neighborhood about 20 minutes away. The name on the request was generic, nothing that stood out. When I pulled up, only one person was waiting. A man in a dark hoodie standing just outside the range of the streetlight. He got into the back seat without a word. I greeted him. He didn't respond. Not unusual. Some people just want the ride. A few minutes in, I noticed something strange. The GPS route kept updating, not rerouting, updating. The destination stayed the same, but the arrival time kept extending by a minute or two every time we approached a turn. I assumed it was traffic data lagging behind. The streets were mostly empty anyway. Still, it nagged at me. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The man wasn't on his phone. He was watching the road ahead, perfectly still. About 10 minutes in, he spoke. "You don't usually take this way." I felt a jolt of irritation more than fear. I told him the app chose the route. He hummed softly and like he wasn't convinced. Then he said, "You drove me last week. You turned earlier." I didn't remember him. I drive dozens of people every week. I told him that. He smiled, just enough for me to see it in the mirror, and said, "You don't remember most things you repeat." The GPS glitched again. This time, the destination pin jumped. Same neighborhood, different street. I asked him to confirm the drop-off location. He said it was correct. His tone was calm, patient, like I was the one slowing things down. When I tried to manually adjust the route, the app froze. No buttons worked. The screen still showed the ride active. The timer's still running. I considered pulling over, but something about the emptiness of the road made me hesitate. The further we drove, the more familiar the streets felt, and that's when I realized why. We were looping. Not exactly the same roads, but close enough. Variations of turns I'd already taken. I checked the time. Nearly 40 minutes had passed. This ride should have been over half an hour ago. I told him we were going in circles. He leaned forward slightly and said, "You always say that at this point." My hands tightened on the wheel. I asked him what he meant. He sighed, like someone disappointed by a predictable outcome. Usually, this is when you start asking questions. Sometimes you pull over, sometimes you don't. I asked him to get out of the car. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just said, "Not yet." The GPS finally updated again. The destination now read, "Current location." The app ended the ride on its own. No sound, no confirmation, just gone. My phone returned to the home screen like nothing had happened. The man sat back in his seat and said, "This is where I usually leave." When I stopped the car, he opened the door and stepped out into a dark side street I didn't recognize. Before closing the door, he looked back at me and said, "You'll forget this one too." I sat there for a long time after he left. When I checked my ride history, that trip wasn't there. No record, no payment, nothing. But the next morning when I opened the app, I had a 5-star rating from a rider I couldn't name. And under it, a single comment. "Good route. See you next time." I stopped driving nights after that. But every once in a while, when I'm half asleep, my phone lights up with a ride request. No pickup location, no destination. Just my car icon already moving. I told myself it would be my final night driving. Just one more shift to cover a bill, one more loop through the city while it slept. I'd been driving late nights for years, long enough to recognize patterns. Who talks, who doesn't, who sits behind you like they're trying to disappear. I knew the roads by muscle memory. I trusted the app more than my instincts. That was my first mistake. The request came in at 3:18 a.m. Pickup location, a dead-end service road behind a closed strip mall. Drop-off? Blank. The app let me accept it anyway. I hesitated longer than usual before heading out there. That stretch of road was poorly lit and rarely used even during the day. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty except for a single figure standing under a flickering light near a dumpster. Tall, still, facing away from me. I rolled down the window and asked if they were the rider. The figure turned slowly and nodded, then opened the back door and got in without a word. They smelled like rain and cold concrete. I started driving without checking the route because there wasn't one. The app showed the ride active but offered no navigation, no ETA, no distance, just the timer ticking upward. I asked where they were headed. They didn't answer. I tried again, a little firmer. Still nothing. In the mirror, I saw their eyes fixed on the road ahead,
unblinking. A few minutes passed. Then they spoke. "You don't usually take this long." My jaw tightened. I told them there wasn't a destination listed. They replied, "There never is at first." Their voice was calm, neutral, like this was something they'd explained many times before. I glanced at the app again. The timer had stopped counting, frozen at exactly 4 minutes and 40 seconds. The streets around us began to feel wrong. Not unfamiliar, worse than that. Familiar in the wrong order. Turns led to roads I recognized, but landmarks were missing or misplaced. A gas station where a park should be, an overpass that shouldn't exist. The passenger leaned forward slightly and said, "You've been here before." I told them I hadn't. They hummed softly, unconvinced. The app finally updated. Drop-off location appeared. It was my home address. I told them that wasn't happening, that I wouldn't take a passenger to my house. They tilted their head, studying me in the mirror, and said, "This is where you always stop." My phone buzzed. A message from the app. Route confirmed. I tried to cancel the ride. The screen dimmed, then returned to the map. No buttons worked. As we got closer, the passengers started pointing things out, where I usually parked, which lights I forgot to turn off, how I hesitated before unlocking my door when I thought someone might be behind me. Each detail landed heavier than the last. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain, like my life had been reduced to a series of habits someone else had memorized. When we pulled onto my street, they said, "You can end it tonight." I stopped the car in front of my house, hands shaking. I asked what they meant. They replied, "Most drivers don't. They keep going. They take another fare. They forget." They reached into their pocket and placed something on the seat between us. My spare key, the one I'd lost months ago. I turned around and shouted for them to get out. The back seat was empty. The ride ended on its own. 5 stars, no comment, no payment, just silence. I sat there until dawn, afraid to go inside. When I finally did, nothing was out of place. No signs of a break-in, no messages, no proof. I quit driving that morning. Months passed. Life settled. The fear dulled. One night, unable to sleep, I opened the Uber app out of habit. The screen loaded slowly, then showed a single notification waiting for me. "You're available now." I deleted the app. But sometimes when I lie awake at night, I swear I hear a car idling outside my house, engine running, door unlocked, waiting for me to decide whether this time I'll end the ride. I didn't plan on taking an Uber that night. I'd missed the last train home by a few minutes and stood on the empty platform longer than I should have, hoping something would change. It was after 2 a.m., the city quiet in that hollow way it only gets when most people are asleep. I finally opened the app, more out of resignation than choice, and requested a ride home. The car arrived almost immediately. Too quickly, actually. I hadn't even locked my phone yet when the notification popped up saying my driver had arrived. The car was already pulled over when I stepped outside, engine running, headlights off. That struck me as odd, but I was tired and cold, and exhaustion has a way of lowering your guard. I got in the back seat, nodded a greeting, and watched the door close behind me. The driver didn't speak. That wasn't unusual, but something about the silence felt heavier than normal. No radio, no navigation voice, just the sound of the engine and the tires on asphalt. I checked my phone to make sure the ride had started. It had. The route looked correct. Estimated arrival time, 23 minutes. 5 minutes in, I noticed we were taking unfamiliar streets. At first, I assumed the app was avoiding traffic, but the longer we drove, the less recognizable the area became. Industrial buildings replaced apartments. Streetlights thinned out. I glanced at the driver in the mirror, expecting to see him watching the road. Instead, he was watching me. Not constantly, just enough that I caught his eyes flick away when I noticed.
I asked if everything was okay with the route. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The app's acting strange tonight," he said. His voice was calm, practiced. I nodded, trying to relax. I checked the map again. The destination pin was still my apartment, but the ETA hadn't changed. Still 23 minutes. We'd already been driving longer than that. I mentioned it. He didn't respond this time. The car slowed as we passed through a stretch of road with no buildings at all, just open space and fencing. The city felt far away. My phone buzzed with a notification, and my stomach dropped when I saw it wasn't from Uber. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You usually sit on the right side." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I hadn't told the driver where I preferred to sit. I typed back, "Who is this?" But the message failed to send. No signal. I tried to cancel the ride. The button did nothing. I looked up to tell the driver to stop the car. He was already slowing down. We pulled over on the side of the road, surrounded by darkness. No street lights, no passing cars. He put the car in park, but didn't turn off the engine. "You don't need to worry," he said. "This part always feels longer than it is." I asked him what he meant. He sighed and turned in his seat slightly, not fully facing me, like he didn't want to seem threatening. He said, "Most passengers don't notice until now. You're quicker than usual." I demanded to get out. He nodded. He said, "You can, but the ride won't end." He gestured to my phone. The screen still showed the trip in progress. My apartment address stared back at me like a promise that wasn't going to be kept. It never does on its own. I opened the door anyway. The moment my foot touched the ground, my phone vibrated. The Uber app refreshed. The ride ended. I slammed the door shut and stepped back, breathing hard, expecting the car to speed away. It didn't. The driver rolled down the window and said, "You should walk straight home. Don't check the app tonight." Then he drove off slowly, like there was no rush. When I got home, my phone showed the ride had lasted 6 minutes. I checked my bank account. No charge, no record, no driver profile, nothing. But under notifications, there was one message I couldn't clear. "Thanks for riding again." I never use Uber after midnight anymore, but sometimes when I open the app by accident, it already shows a car nearby, engine running, waiting for me to miss the last train again.
I wasn't doing anything unusual that night. Just lying in bed, scrolling aimlessly, half watching a show I'd already seen too many times. It was late, past midnight, but not late enough to feel dangerous. The apartment was quiet in the normal way, refrigerator humming, pipes clicking softly, distant traffic fading in and out. I lived alone, and I was used to the silence. It didn't bother me anymore. That's why the phone call startled me. My phone rang once, sharply, breaking the calm. No name, no number, just unknown. I almost ignored it, assuming it was spam, but something about the timing felt off. I answered without speaking. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then I heard voices, multiple, overlapping, muffled like they were coming from another room. I pulled the phone away from my ear, checking the screen, confused. It was definitely a call, definitely live. One voice stood out, a man speaking clearly enough for me to understand. "Don't say his name yet, he's still awake." I whispered, "Hello?" into the phone. The voices stopped instantly. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to explain it away. Pocket dial, radio interference, some kind of prank. But when I checked the call log, there was no record of it. Not missed, not answered, nothing. Like it never happened. I tried to sleep, but every sound felt sharper after that. Around 1:30 a.m., my phone rang again. Same unknown label. I didn't answer this time. I just listened as it rang and rang and rang, far longer than normal. When it finally stopped, I noticed something worse. Voicemail. I hadn't declined the call. I hadn't sent it to voicemail. It had done it on its own. My hands were shaking as I pressed play. At first, it was quiet. Then I heard the same voices again, closer this time, clearer. Someone laughed softly. The same man from before said, "Okay, he's listening now." Then my own voice played back. Not recorded, not distorted, just me breathing, the faint sound of my apartment in the background. The voicemail ended with a soft clicking sound, like a call disconnecting. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next week, the calls continued, always late, always from unknown. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. It didn't seem to matter. The voices talked about mundane things, timing, lights, whether I'd noticed yet. They never acknowledged me directly. It felt like eavesdropping on a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, one that kept forgetting I was on the line. The worst part was the accuracy. They mentioned things I hadn't told anyone, that I'd been sleeping less, that I'd started locking the door twice, that I'd moved my phone charger closer to the bed. Once I heard a woman's voice say, "He's in the bedroom, lights off." I was, exactly as she said. The final call came on a night when I'd left my phone in the living room on purpose, trying to prove something to myself. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it ring through the wall. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at it. When I finished and checked the phone, there was no missed call, no voicemail. But my call history was open. At the top was a call placed at 2:07 a.m. Outgoing. Duration, 14 minutes. I don't make calls in my sleep, and I don't know who I stayed on the line with that night. But sometimes, when my phone screen lights up for no reason, I still wonder if I'm listening, or if I'm the one being listened to. I worked the closing shift at a small convenience store just outside town, the kind that stayed open late mostly for truckers and insomniacs. By midnight, business slowed to almost nothing. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the store felt too big for just one person. I didn't mind it. I liked the routine. Count the register, restock the shelves, mop the floor, lock up the back room. It gave me something to focus on when the nights stretched on too long. The voices started a few weeks into the job. At first, I only heard them when I was near the back of the store, where the walk-in freezer and storage room were. Low murmurs, indistinct. I assumed it was the refrigeration system, or maybe sound carrying from outside. Old buildings do that. But the longer I worked there, the clearer the voices became. Not loud, not frantic, just conversational. Like two people talking calmly in another room, unaware they could be heard. One night, while restocking the drinks, I distinctly heard someone say, "He's still here." I froze, heart racing, and stepped out from behind the aisle to look toward the counter. The store was empty. No customers, doors locked automatically after midnight. I checked the security cameras. Every angle showed exactly what I already knew. I was alone. The next night, the voices returned. This time, I stood perfectly still near the freezer, barely breathing. They weren't arguing or whispering secrets. They were talking about normal things. Time passing, lights staying on too long, whether something should be done tonight or later. The unsettling part wasn't what they said. It was how casually they said it. Like they weren't hiding, like I wasn't supposed to be able to hear them at all. I finally worked up the courage to open the freezer door. The cold air rushed out, fogging my vision. The shelves were packed with boxes. No one inside. But the moment I shut the door, the voices stopped. The silence afterward felt heavy, unnatural. My ears rang. I laughed nervously, telling myself I was tired, maybe stressed. I finished my shift and went home, trying not to think about it.
Over the next few nights, the voices changed. They started mentioning details that felt too specific. My name, the fact that I always checked the lock twice before leaving, that I drank coffee even when I shouldn't. Once I heard one of them say, "He's listening now." I dropped what I was holding and backed away, pulse pounding. The cameras still showed nothing. No movement, no hidden figures, just me standing in the aisle, visibly shaking. The breaking point came near 3 a.m. during my last shift of the week. I was mopping near the counter when I heard the freezer door creak open behind me, slowly, deliberately. I turned around. The door was closed, but the voices were louder than ever, clear enough now that I could hear individual breaths between words. One voice said, "He won't check again." Another replied, "He never does." My chest tightened as I realized they were right. I hadn't opened the freezer a second time all week. I quit the next morning. Months later, I ran into someone who still worked there. Out of curiosity, I asked if anyone else had complained about noises. He looked at me strangely and said the freezer had been disconnected for renovations weeks before I left. No power, no refrigeration system, no sound at all. Sometimes, late at night, when everything around me is quiet, I swear I can still hear them, talking softly, patiently, like they're waiting for me to stop listening again. I didn't notice him at first, and that's the part that still bothers me the most. He didn't stand out. He wasn't lurking in corners or staring too long. He was just there. A man who showed up at the same place as I did, late at night, often enough that my brain decided it was coincidence. The bus stop near my apartment, the 24-hour diner I went to after work, the quiet street I walked down every night at exactly the same time. I worked late shifts back then, the kind that end when the city is half asleep. My routine was predictable because it had to be. Same bus, same route, same shortcut through a dimly lit block that shaved 5 minutes off my walk home. Predictability felt safe, familiar. I didn't realize it was also an invitation. The first real moment of discomfort came when he spoke to me. It was casual, too casual. He commented on the weather, then joked about how dead the streets were at night. I nodded, gave short replies, nothing more. When the bus arrived, we sat in different seats. When I got off, I didn't look back. Still, I felt something tighten in my chest, like I'd missed a step going downstairs. Nothing had happened, but something felt wrong. After that, he started appearing more often. Not every night, that would have been obvious. Instead, it was just enough to feel unsettling. 2 nights in a row, then nothing for a week. Then again at a different place. Once, he was already at the diner when I arrived. Another time, he stepped off the bus 1 stop before mine and waited on the sidewalk, scrolling on his phone, as if he'd just decided to stretch his legs. He never followed me directly, never crossed a line that I could clearly point to. Until the night he mentioned my schedule. We were standing at the bus stop, the street quiet except for the hum of distant traffic. He smiled and said, "Rough one tonight. Tuesdays always hit harder than Thursdays." I laughed politely, then froze. I'd never told him which days I worked late. I asked how he knew it was Tuesday. He shrugged and said, "Lucky guess." But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, he kept proving it. He knew when I'd missed the bus. He knew when I'd stopped for food instead of going straight home. Once he said, "You won't take the shortcut tonight, right?" Like it was a joke. I stopped using it entirely after that. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be a normal explanation. People notice patterns, that's all this was. Then I decided to test him. One night I took a different bus, walked through crowded streets instead of quiet ones. I changed everything. He didn't show up. I felt relieved, almost proud of myself for breaking the spell. The next night, I went back to my old routine. He was already waiting. This time, he didn't pretend it was a coincidence. He told me he liked routines, said they made people easy to understand. He talked about my habits like he was reviewing a list. When I checked my phone, how fast I walked, how I always hesitated before unlocking my door. He wasn't threatening. That was worse. He spoke like someone describing a hobby. I stopped going out at night after that, changed jobs, moved apartments, deleted social media. Months passed. Life slowly started to feel normal again. Then, one evening, as I came home earlier than usual, I noticed a small piece of paper folded neatly under my door. On it was a simple sentence, written carefully like it had taken time. "Your schedule changed. I noticed." I never saw him again. But I still vary my routines, because the most disturbing thing wasn't that he followed me. It was how long he watched before I ever noticed him at all.
I've always been a routine person. Same grocery store every Sunday evening, same cafe before work, same walking route home, even when I told myself I should switch it up. I lived alone in a small apartment building on a quiet street, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. That predictability made life feel manageable, safe, especially after long workdays when all I wanted was to move through familiar spaces without thinking too much. That's why I noticed him. The first time, it was outside the grocery store. I remember because I was irritated. My headphones had died and the store was louder than usual. He stood near the bike rack, not doing anything in particular, just watching the parking lot like he was waiting for someone. Mid-30s, maybe older. Clean clothes. Nothing about him screamed danger. When I passed, he smiled briefly, the polite kind of smile you give a stranger when your eyes meet by accident. I forgot about him almost immediately. A few days later, I saw him again. This time, he was across the street from my apartment building, standing under a streetlight that flickered on and off. I noticed him because I was fumbling with my keys, and that feeling of being watched crept up my spine. When I looked over, he wasn't staring. He was looking past me, like I wasn't even there. I told myself it was coincidence. Cities are full of people who pass through your life without meaning anything. But then, he started showing up everywhere. Outside the cafe I stopped at before work, sitting on a bench in the park during my lunch break, standing near the bus stop on nights I worked late. Always far enough away that I couldn't accuse him of following me, always positioned like he just happened to be there. What unsettled me wasn't how often I saw him, it was when. He appeared on days I changed my routine, when I left work early, when I stayed late, when I skipped the cafe entirely and went somewhere else. It felt like he was adjusting to me, not the other way around. I tried testing it, took a different route home one night, looping around an extra block. Halfway through, I spotted him leaning against a closed storefront, looking at his phone. When I slowed down, he slowed down. When I stopped, he stopped. The moment I turned my head, he looked away. My heart was pounding by the time I reached my building. A week later, I worked late on a Thursday. The street was nearly empty when I got home, quiet enough that every sound felt amplified. As I unlocked the front door, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, unhurried, deliberate. I turned around. It was him. He stood just outside the light, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. Before I could speak, he said, "You don't usually work Thursdays." His voice was calm, almost friendly. My stomach dropped. I demanded to know how he knew that. He smiled faintly and shrugged. "People notice patterns," he said, then walked past me and disappeared into the darkness. After that, the feeling of being watched followed me inside. Small things started happening. My phone battery drained overnight. A cafe receipt appeared in my kitchen counter that I didn't remember bringing home. One morning, while brushing my teeth, I noticed a clean handprint on my bathroom mirror, fingers spread wide, as if someone had pressed their palm there deliberately. I checked the locks constantly. I slept lightly, waking at every sound in the hallway. The last time I saw him was near the bus stop. I'd worked myself into a quiet rage by then, fear turning into something sharper. I walked straight up to him and told him to leave me alone, to stop watching me. He looked genuinely confused. Then he frowned and said, "I stopped watching weeks ago." He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "You've been alone long enough now. I was just making sure you stayed that way." That night, I left. When I returned days later with someone else, my apartment looked untouched, but on my bedroom wall, faint and uneven like it had been traced again and again with a finger, were the words, "You changed the ending." I didn't notice anything wrong at first because my life was painfully ordinary. I worked a desk job, lived alone, and spent most evenings at home, scrolling through my phone or watching whatever autoplay served me next. I wasn't someone people paid attention to. I didn't post much online, didn't share my location, didn't overshare my personal life. That's why when strange things started happening, my first instinct wasn't fear, it was confusion. It began with emails, password reset requests I hadn't asked for, login alerts from devices I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was spam or a random hacking attempt. I changed my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and moved on. But the notifications kept coming. Not frantic, not aggressive, just persistent. Always late at night, always when I was home alone. It felt less like an attack and more like someone testing a lock they knew would eventually open. Then my streaming history changed. Shows I'd never watched appeared half-finished, paused at specific moments, like someone had stopped deliberately. Music playlists I didn't recognize were saved under my account, filled with songs that matched my taste a little too closely. Familiar artists, familiar moods. It felt personal in a way algorithms never do. I told myself it was a glitch, but deep down I knew someone else was inside my digital life, moving around quietly, careful not to leave a mess. Things escalated when I got a message from my own account. It was a simple DM sent to myself at 2:11 a.m. It read, "You should lock your door tonight." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a prank or some delayed draft. When I checked the login history, the message had been sent from my phone, from my apartment, at a time when I'd been asleep. I called customer support the next day, walking them through everything. They were polite, reassuring, and ultimately useless. According to them, nothing seemed wrong. No suspicious activity, no unknown devices. Everything matched my usual behavior patterns. When I hung up, my apartment felt smaller. Every familiar object suddenly felt like it had been touched when I wasn't looking. That night, I changed my routine, turned off all devices, unplugged my router, locked every door and window. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the building settling. At 2:11 a.m., my phone screen lit up on the nightstand, despite being powered off. A single notification appeared. No sound, no vibration, just text on black. That's not where you usually sleep. I moved out the next week. I deleted accounts, changed numbers, started fresh somewhere new. For a while, it worked. Then one evening, months later, I logged into a new streaming service for the first time. No history, no profile picture, just a single recommendation waiting for me. The title was unfamiliar, but the description felt wrong, too accurate, too intimate. Below it, in small gray text, it said, "Because you watched this late at night alone." I used to think routines were harmless, comforting even. I worked regular hours, stopped for coffee at the same place every morning, went to the same grocery store on Sundays, and took evening walks around my neighborhood to clear my head. It was a quiet suburban area, the kind where porch lights stayed on wait and people nodded politely but never really talked. I liked the predictability of it. It made life feel manageable.
Looking back now, I realize routines don't just make life easier for you, they make you easier to follow. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. One morning, the barista at my usual coffee shop handed me my order before I said a word. I laughed and made a joke about being predictable. She smiled but hesitated, then said, "I thought you were with the guy who usually waits outside." I asked what she meant, but she was already moving on to the next customer. When I turned around, I didn't see anyone unusual. Just cars, commuters, and the glass reflecting my own confused face. Over the next few weeks, things began lining up in unsettling ways. I'd feel watched during my evening walks, not in a dramatic sense, but like a pressure on my back, subtle and constant. Once, I noticed footsteps matching mine, always a few beats behind. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned around, there was no one there. I told myself I was paranoid. Stress does that to people. So does too much silence. Then, my trash went missing. Not the whole bin, just specific bags. The ones from nights I cooked. The ones with receipts, packaging, anything that showed what I'd bought or eaten. I only noticed because the bin felt lighter than it should have been. A neighbor suggested animals, raccoons, stray dogs. It sounded reasonable until I found the bags neatly stacked behind a cluster of trees at the edge of the block, tied exactly the way I tie them. The breaking point came when I got a handwritten note. It was slipped under my front door sometime during the night. Plain paper, no envelope, no fingerprints that I could see. It said, "You should try sleeping earlier. You look more tired than usual." My stomach dropped because it wasn't wrong. I hadn't been sleeping, and worse, I hadn't told anyone. I called the police. They took a report, walked the perimeter, asked if I'd had conflicts with anyone, an ex, a coworker, a neighbor. I had nothing. No suspects, no proof. They told me to install cameras, vary my routine, and call if anything escalated. When they left, the house felt unbearably quiet, like it was holding its breath. I followed their advice, changed my schedule, drove to different stores, took different routes. For a while, the ease eased. The sense of being watched faded. I started sleeping again. That's when the final note arrived. This one taped to my car windshield in broad daylight. It read, "You're harder to follow when you panic. I preferred you calm." I sold the house within a month. New city, new job, new routines, carefully broken and rearranged. Years have passed now. I don't walk at night anymore. I don't stick to patterns. Still, sometimes, I'll catch someone glancing at me a little too long in public and my heart will race. Not because I recognize them, but because part of me wonders if they recognize me. And worse, if they're relieved I finally stopped being predictable. I worked the overnight shift at a small gas station just off the interstate, the kind of place truckers stopped at when they were running on caffeine and stubbornness. The store was surrounded by nothing but empty road and dark fields that stretched farther than the headlights could reach. Between midnight and dawn, time moved differently there. Minutes dragged, hours blurred, and the hum of the refrigerators became the loudest thing in my world. I liked it that way. The quiet felt safe, predictable. Most nights, I spent my time restocking shelves, wiping down the counter, and watching the security monitor flick between grainy black and white angles of the empty lot outside. Around 3:17 a.m., the phone behind the counter rang. It startled me so badly I dropped the mop. No one ever called the station at night. The caller ID just read, "out of area." I answered, expecting a prank or maybe a lost customer asking for directions. Instead, there was only breathing on the other end. Slow, uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. I asked if they needed help. The breathing stopped. After a few seconds of silence, the line went dead. I told myself it was nothing, but when I looked up at the security monitor, I noticed something new. A car parked at the very edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. I was certain it hadn't been there a moment earlier. I watched the screen, waiting for someone to step out, but nothing moved. The car's engine wasn't running, no headlights, just a dark shape crouched in the shadows. I tried to focus on my work, but every few minutes my eyes drifted back to the monitor. At 3:41 a.m., the phone rang again. Same caller ID. This time, when I answered, a voice spoke, quiet, strained, like it was being forced through clenched teeth. It said my name. I hadn't introduced myself earlier. My chest tightened as I demanded to know who it was. The voice replied, "I'm already here. You just won't look hard enough." The lights inside the store flickered once, then steadied. I grabbed the bat from under the counter and walked toward the glass doors, peering into the lot. The car was gone. In its place were wet footprints leading from the darkness straight up to the entrance, stopping inches from the door. They were too large, too deep, as if whatever made them was far heavier than any person. The phone rang a third time, but this time it didn't come from behind the counter. It came from somewhere inside the store. I turned slowly, heart hammering, and saw the office phone blinking red. Voicemail. On the security monitor, the camera behind the counter switched on by itself. The screen showed me standing there, staring at the office door. And behind me, reflected faintly in the glass, was someone else, waiting patiently for the shift to end. I took the night shift at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of town because it paid better and because I liked being alone. The building sat miles away from the nearest neighborhood, surrounded by empty fields and a chain-link fence that rattled when the wind picked up. During the day, the place was loud and chaotic, forklifts, radios, shouting, but at night it felt like a hollow shell. My job was simple: monitor the cameras, do hourly patrols, log anything unusual, and make sure the doors stayed locked until the morning crew arrived. I'd been doing it for nearly 6 months without incident, and I trusted the routine enough to stop being nervous. That changed on a Tuesday around 1:40 a.m. I was halfway through my shift, sipping burnt coffee in the security office, when one of the camera feeds flickered. It was camera 12, the far loading bay that hadn't been used in years. The image warped for a second, then stabilized. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. At first, I thought nothing was wrong. The bay was empty, just concrete floor and a row of closed doors. Then I noticed something subtle. The motion sensor icon was active. According to the system, something was moving in that bay. I rewound the footage. On playback, the floor looked empty, but the sensor triggered again and again, like something invisible was pacing back and forth just out of view. I told myself it was a glitch. Old building, old wiring. Still, I logged it and grabbed my flashlight before starting my patrol early. The warehouse at night had a sound all its own. Metal popping as it cooled, the distant hum of generators, the echo of my own footsteps stretching too far down empty aisles. As I approached the unused loading bay, the air felt colder, heavier, like I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. My flashlight beam swept across the floor, the walls, the doors. Nothing. But the deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt, like I was interrupting something that had been waiting for privacy. When I turned to leave, I heard it. Footsteps that weren't mine. They echoed from somewhere behind the stacked pallets, slow and deliberate, matching my pace, but stopping when I stopped. I called out, identifying myself, my voice sounding thin in the open space. No response, just silence that felt too intentional. I backed away, never turning my back until I was nearly running. When I reached the security office and slammed the door shut, my hands were shaking. On the monitors, camera 12 was dark. Not static, not frozen, just black, as if something had covered the lens from the inside.
At 3 a.m., the radio crackled. No one was supposed to be on site with me. A voice came through, distorted but unmistakably human. It said, "You missed a spot." I demanded to know who it was, but the radio only hissed in reply. I checked the logs. No incoming transmissions, no alerts. Every camera except one showed empty corridors. Camera 7, pointed at the main aisle, showed me sitting in the office and someone standing just outside the door, close enough that their breath fogged the glass. I didn't move, neither did they. After a full minute, the figure stepped back and vanished into the darkness between shelves. Morning came eventually, pale and ordinary. The day supervisor found me still in the office, lights on, logs perfectly filled out. I quit that same day without explaining why. A week later, I got a call from the company asking about something strange. According to their records, someone had been clocking in on the night shift for years before I was hired. Always alone, always logged in as present, even on nights when the building was supposedly empty. The name on the file wasn't mine, but the handwriting in the incident logs was identical. I worked the late-night shift as a cleaner in a regional hospital, the kind that never truly sleeps but feels eerily close to it after midnight. Most of the staff were gone by then, doctors reduced to a skeleton crew, nurses moving quietly between rooms, voices kept low out of habit more than necessity. My assigned area was the older wing of the building, partially closed for renovations. Patients weren't supposed to be there anymore, just empty rooms, old equipment, and hallways that smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. I liked the work. It was quiet, repetitive, and predictable. At night, predictability mattered. Around 2:20 a.m., while mopping the end of a long corridor, I heard a call bell ring. It echoed sharply, cutting through the silence. I froze. According to the schedule, every room in that wing was empty. I checked my clipboard, then the door numbers along the hallway. The bell rang again. Room 317. I stood there for a full minute, telling myself it was a wiring issue, something left over from before the wing was shut down. Still, policy said I had to report it. I picked up the wall phone and called the nurses' station. They checked their system and told me the same thing I already knew. No patients assigned to that wing, no active call lights. I decided to check the room myself. The closer I got to room 317, the colder the hallway felt. Not dramatically colder, just enough to notice, like stepping into a shadow. The call bell stopped ringing as soon as I reached the door. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The room was empty. No bed, no monitors, just pale walls and an old chair in the corner that hadn't been there earlier in the night. I stood there, listening, when I heard breathing. Slow, shallow, coming from behind the wall near the head of where the bed should have been. I backed out immediately and shut the door. On my way back down the hall, more call lights started going off, one by one, different rooms, different tones. The sound overlapped until it became overwhelming, echoing through the wing like an alarm meant for no one. I called the nurses' station again, my voice shaking this time. They told me none of it was registering on their end. No alerts, no system errors, nothing. Then the overhead speaker crackled to life. Environmental services to room 317. That was my department, my job. But no one should have been paging me there, especially not by room number. I looked up at the speaker, heart pounding, and that's when the call bell stopped all at once. The silence afterward was worse, thick, pressing. I turned to leave, only to see someone standing at the far end of the corridor, a patient gown, bare feet, head tilted slightly like they were studying me. The lights above them flickered, and for just a second, I could see straight through their body, the hallway visible behind them. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main wing, nearly colliding with a nurse who stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I quit that night, didn't give notice, didn't go back for my things. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked someone who still worked there about room 317. They went quiet.
Then they told me that room had been sealed years ago after a patient died alone during a night shift. Call bell malfunctioned, alarms never triggered, and no one checked on them until morning. Since then, anyone assigned to the old wing reported the same thing: call bells, overhead pages, and the feeling that someone was waiting for help that never came.
I wasn't supposed to be on that road. My GPS had glitched earlier in the evening, rerouting me off the highway onto a narrow two-lane stretch that cut straight through miles of empty land. At first, I didn't mind. I'd been driving for hours, and the silence felt like a relief. No street lights, no houses, just my headlights carving a thin tunnel through the dark. The road went on forever, flat and featureless, with fields on both sides that looked like they had no end. After about 30 minutes, I realized something was wrong. I hadn't passed a single sign. No mile markers, no exits, not even a mailbox. I checked the dashboard clock. Time was moving normally. The fuel gauge wasn't dropping faster than it should. Everything looked fine, except the road never changed. I rolled down the window, half expecting to hear insects or wind, but the night outside was unnaturally quiet, like sound didn't travel properly out there. I tried turning around. I slowed down, checked my mirrors, and made a careful U-turn. As soon as my headlights swung the other way, my stomach dropped. The road behind me looked exactly the same as the one ahead, straight, endless, swallowed by darkness. I drove for another 10 minutes, then another 20. Nothing changed. No intersections, no landmarks, just the hum of my engine and the white lines slipping under my car. That's when I noticed the building. It stood far off to the right, barely visible in my peripheral vision, a dark shape against darker land. No lights, no fence, just a low structure, maybe a gas station or an abandoned rest stop. I slowed down, watching it pass my window. A minute later, it was gone. I kept driving. Then, 15 minutes later, I saw it again. Same building, same shape, same distance from the road. My chest tightened. I sped up, then slowed down, watching carefully this time. The building didn't move closer. It didn't get farther away. It stayed exactly where it was, as if the road itself was sliding past it on a loop. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I checked my phone, I had no signal, no map, no location, just the time and a battery that was slowly draining. I pulled over. The moment I stepped out of my car, the silence felt heavier. The air smelled dry and stale, like dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. I could see my car clearly, but beyond the reach of my headlights, the land dissolved into nothing. I called out, my voice sounding wrong, flat, like it didn't echo the way it should. No response. That's when I heard footsteps. Not close, not far. Somewhere out there in the dark, matching my breathing. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped when I stopped. I whispered, "Hello." My voice cracked. The footsteps didn't answer. They just waited. I got back into the car and drove. At some point, exhaustion blurred everything together. The road, the darkness, the building reappearing again and again on my right. Eventually, I saw headlights ahead, real ones, moving. I nearly cried with relief. As I got closer, I realized it was a police cruiser parked sideways across the road. I pulled up fast and jumped out, waving my arms. The officer stepped out looking confused. I told him everything at once, getting lost, the looping road, the building, the silence. He listened without interrupting. When he finished, he glanced down the road behind me. He said, "There's no road back there." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. According to him, I'd been found parked on a service access strip that ended miles ago. No buildings, no long stretch of highway, no loop, just empty land. He asked me how long I thought I'd been driving. I checked the clock. 5 hours had passed. I don't drive at night anymore. And whenever I'm on a road with nothing on either side, I get this overwhelming urge to keep going because I'm terrified of what might happen if I stop again. I was driving through the desert just after sunset, heading west with nothing but a half tank of gas and a deadline I was already going to miss. I'd taken this route before, long, empty highways cutting through miles of scrub and rock, but that evening felt different. The sky darkened too fast, the orange fading into deep purple in a way that made the road ahead feel narrower than it should have been. My radio lost signal, dropping into static, and my GPS froze with the blue arrow blinking in place like it didn't know where to put me. I kept driving. About an hour later, I saw lights ahead. Real ones. Street lights. Neon. A town. Relief washed over me so quickly it almost felt physical. I hadn't seen a sign announcing it, but I didn't question it. Out there, you take what you can get. As I got closer, the road widened. The asphalt smoother, the lights brighter. A single sign stood at the edge of town, rusted and barely readable. I couldn't make out the name, just the word welcome. The streets were empty. No cars, no people. Every storefront was lit, but the windows were dark, like the lights were on just for show. I parked near what looked like a diner, the neon sign buzzing softly. When I stepped out of my car, the air felt wrong, too still. Too dry. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have, bouncing off buildings that looked decades old but somehow untouched by time. I tried the diner door, locked. So was the gas station and the motel. Every place looked open, but nothing would let me in. I walked down the street, calling out, my voice sounding thin and out of place. No answer, no movement. Even the neon signs didn't flicker naturally. They pulsed together, slowly, like they were breathing. That's when I noticed the clocks. Every building had one, above doors, in windows, hanging crooked on walls. All of them showed the same time, 9:42. My phone said it was just after 11. I checked again. No signal, no map, just the time ticking forward, second by second, while the clocks around me stayed frozen. I turned back toward my car. It wasn't where I left it. The street looked longer now, stretching farther in both directions. The buildings seemed closer together, leaning inward slightly, as if the town was tightening around me. I started walking faster, then jogging, my breath coming sharp and fast. I passed the diner again. Same buzzing sign, same locked door. The clocks still read 9:42. Panic set in. I ran. No matter which way I turned, the streets looped back into the same central strip. My chest burned, my legs ached, and the silence pressed in until it felt unbearable. Finally, exhausted, I stopped in the middle of the road and screamed. Not words, just sound. Something answered. Not a voice, a shift. The lights dimmed slightly, and for the first time I noticed shadows moving behind the windows. Not people, just shapes, sliding slowly across the walls, as if something inside the buildings was adjusting itself. I backed away, shaking. That's when the clocks changed. All at once, every clock ticked forward. 9:43. I don't know why, but that terrified me more than anything else. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and opened them again. The town was gone. I was standing on the side of the highway, my car parked exactly where it should have been, engine cold. No lights, no buildings, just desert stretching out under a star-filled sky. My phone buzzed a signal return, notifications flooding in. According to the time, I'd been stopped for less than 5 minutes. I drove the rest of the way without stopping.
Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched maps, old records, satellite images. There was no town there. Never had been. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and see lights in the distance, all lined up too perfectly, I feel my foot ease off the gas. Because I know now that not every place you find is meant to be entered. Some places only exist when you're already lost. I was driving home after a night shift, exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open, when my GPS suddenly rerouted me off the main highway. It claimed this way was faster. I didn't question it. The road narrowed, the streetlights disappeared, and my signal dropped to 0. Trees closed in on both sides like a tunnel, their branches scraping the roof of my car. After 10 minutes, I realized something was wrong. I'd been driving straight, but the same broken signpost with peeling white paint kept appearing again and again. I slowed down, my stomach tightening, and that's when I noticed the silence. No insects, no wind. Even my engine sounded muted, like it was being swallowed by the dark. I tried turning around, but the road behind me was gone. Just trees, thick and endless where asphalt should have been. Panic set in. I stepped out of the car, phone flashlight shaking in my hand, and saw footprints on the road, barefoot, leading away into the forest. Before I could react, my car doors slammed shut on their own. The headlights flickered, then turned off completely. In the darkness, I heard something breathing, slow, deep, and far too close. I ran, not toward the forest, but straight ahead, following the road that shouldn't exist. The air grew colder with every step, and I started seeing things. Abandoned cars half sunken into the ground, their doors open, their interiors empty, as if the people inside had simply vanished mid-escape. I finally saw lights in the distance and collapsed onto the asphalt, crying with relief. When I woke up, I was on the shoulder of the original highway, my car parked perfectly, engine cold. Police said I'd been reported missing for 6 hours. The GPS history showed no reroute, no side road, no detour. But when I checked my shoes later, they were caked in mud, and wrapped around my ankle was a single footprint burned into the skin, like something had followed me all the way back.
I've always felt safe in my house. It's a modest 2-story home on the edge of town. Quiet streets, neighbors that rarely visit. That night, though, I realized how little I really knew about safe. I was home alone because my parents went out for the evening, and my older sister was at a friend's. I had made popcorn, grabbed a blanket, and sat on the couch watching a movie. Around 10 p.m., I realized I hadn't locked the back door. I got up, walked down the hallway, and as I reached the door, I felt the air shift, like the room suddenly got heavier. I turned the knob, locked. I told myself I had imagined it and went back to the couch. 30 minutes later, I heard it, the soft click of a lock. My stomach sank. I froze, staring at the hallway that led to the kitchen. Nothing moved. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, but the house was still, dead still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then I heard it again, a soft, dragging sound from the kitchen floor. Something heavy, something deliberate. My heart raced. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept toward the kitchen. Nothing, just my knives on the counter, the floor tiles shining in the dim light. I went back to the living room and tried to focus on the movie, but I couldn't. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow felt wrong. That's when the phone rang. I froze. I don't usually answer unknown numbers, but this time I picked up. Silence. Just silence. Then
A whisper, barely audible. "I see you." I dropped the phone. The call had ended. I ran to check the doors, all locked, all windows closed. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was a prank, but then I saw it. A single footprint on the hallway carpet. Not muddy, not dusty, clean, and small. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the lights on, clutching the bat, listening and listening. When morning came, I checked every door and window again. Everything was secure. My parents came home later, laughing about dinner plans. I said nothing. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The door I had locked that night had a small scratch on the frame, right at eye level. Not deep, not threatening, just watching. I used to feel completely safe in my own home, until the night I realized someone else was watching, and not from the street. It started as an ordinary evening. I had finished homework, my parents were out running errands, and my older brother was at band practice. I made some tea and settled into my living room with a book, letting the quiet of the house lull me into comfort. Around 9:30 p.m., I noticed something odd. The lights in the house across the street were all on, even though I knew no one was supposed to be home. I shrugged it off. Maybe a friend had stopped by. I didn't think much of it and went back to reading. An hour later, I heard a soft tapping at the window behind the couch. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't dare turn around immediately. It wasn't a branch scraping or the wind. It had a rhythm, deliberate, slow, almost like someone testing patience. I slowly leaned back and glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the lawn. I told myself it must be a trick of the light or a loose shutter swinging in the wind. I went to the kitchen to grab a snack, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling along my spine. As I opened the fridge, I noticed the reflection in the window over the sink. A silhouette, tall, thin, standing at the edge of my yard. I blinked, and it was gone. My mind raced, but I told myself it was just my imagination, that the shadows played tricks at night. I locked all the doors again, double-checked the windows, and even pulled the blinds shut. Back on the couch, I tried to read, but I kept hearing faint creaks from upstairs. The house was empty. My parents were gone. My brother was gone. I called my phone, checking for messages. Nothing unusual. And then the tapping started again. Only this time, it was inside the house. Soft, almost inaudible, but coming from the hallway leading to my bedroom. I froze, listening. Step, step, stop, step, step, stop. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the couch and crept toward the hallway. The floorboards moaned under my weight, and I forced myself to stop breathing for a moment. The hallway was empty. Nothing moved. The only sound was my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I turned to go back when I noticed something I hadn't before. The front door, which I was sure I had locked, was slightly ajar. My stomach sank. I slowly closed it, double-checked the locks, and leaned against it, shaking. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification. I picked it up. It was a text message from my own number. It said, "I see you." I dropped the phone. Every rational thought left me. I backed into the living room, glancing at every corner, every shadow. And that's when I realized the reflection of the hallway mirror didn't match reality. In the mirror, something was standing behind me. I spun around. Empty. My pulse thundered. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, and eventually dawn broke. I never saw anyone or anything, but over the next few days, strange things kept happening. Small items moved on their own, Doors unlocked themselves, and I kept receiving texts from my own number, all containing short, simple messages. Still watching. Not alone. See you soon. I moved out of that house weeks later, but even now, whenever I pass it at night, the lights across the street flicker on for no reason, and I can't help thinking that someone, or something, still remembers exactly when I'm home.
I was 16, home alone for the weekend, and thought it would be fun to finally relax without anyone around. My parents had gone out of town for a wedding, and my older brother was staying at a friend's place. I had the house entirely to myself. At first, everything was ordinary. Music playing softly in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak from the old floors. I made myself a snack, sprawled across the couch, and started binge-watching a show I'd been avoiding for weeks. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard it, a faint whisper coming from somewhere in the house. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind brushing through the old siding. But then the whisper repeated, soft enough that I couldn't make out words, but deliberate, as if someone were trying to speak directly into my ear. I froze. The music in the kitchen continued, the refrigerator hummed, and yet the whisper persisted, seeming to shift from the living room to the hallway to the stairs. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I was imagining things. I poured a glass of water and sat back on the couch, my back pressed against the cushions as I tried to focus on the TV. But then came another sound, a soft tap, tap, tap from inside the walls themselves, like someone running their fingers along the studs. My pulse spiked, and I realized I had left the lights off. Slowly, I flicked on the living room lamp. Nothing moved. Everything looked normal. The whispering started again, this time clearer and distinctly my name, Alex. I spun around, staring at the empty hallway, the staircase leading to my bedroom, the dark kitchen beyond. I yelled, "Who's there?" Nothing but silence. I ran to the kitchen and checked the doors and windows. Locked, every single one. I checked the back door, triple locked it, and even checked the sliding glass panel in the living room. Everything was secure. I returned to the couch, but every creak of the floor made me jump. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, and the whispering didn't stop. In fact, it grew closer, more insistent, almost as if it were moving through the walls toward me. I covered my ears and pressed my head against the cushion, trying to drown it out. That's when I noticed the faintest shadow moving along the far wall, too quick to be my own reflection, too dark to be cast by the lamp. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, shakily walking through the hallway, checking each room. Nothing. Every bedroom was empty. The bathroom was empty. The upstairs hallway showed no sign of movement, but the whisper followed me, echoing now, twisting in pitch, saying things I couldn't fully comprehend, half words, half breathing. My nerves frayed. I locked myself in my bedroom. I barricaded the door with my desk and dresser, shaking, barely daring to breathe. Hours passed. I slept in small bursts, waking to the sound of furniture scraping softly across the floor outside my room. Sometimes it sounded like someone pacing. Sometimes it was just a drag, like a hand across the wall. By morning, I could barely eat, barely think. I didn't want to leave my room, but I had to get out. When I opened the door, the house looked untouched. No signs of entry. Everything was exactly where it had been. I ran downstairs, expecting relief, but the kitchen table had something new. A single post-it note in my handwriting, perfectly formed, but I never wrote it. It read simply, "I've been waiting for you." I froze. The whispering returned, but now soft, almost affectionate, like someone leaning into a conversation I hadn't asked for. I grabbed my phone and called my parents, my hands shaking. When they answered, everything sounded normal. I told them I'd be fine, hung up, and sat silently for the rest of the morning. Weeks later, I moved to a friend's house while renovations were done on my parents' place. When I returned, I noticed something in the walls of my old room, faint scratches running vertically, like someone had tried to crawl inside. And sometimes, when I'm alone in that house, even now, I can hear the faintest whisper of my name echoing from somewhere behind the drywall. I don't know if it's a person. I don't know if it's a thing. But I do know one thing. Being home alone is no longer safe, and it never will be. I've been camping my whole life. My dad took me into the woods before I was old enough to tie my own boots, so I learned early what normal forest sounds are supposed to be like. Wind through trees, distant animals, branches snapping under weight. That's how I knew something was wrong that night, because the sounds around our campsite didn't follow any pattern I recognized. There were 3 of us on the trip: me, my friend Tyler, and his older brother Mark. We drove 6 hours into a national forest in the Pacific Northwest, far from campgrounds and cell service. The plan was simple: 2 nights, 1 hike, no distractions. By the time we finished setting up the tents, the sun was already dipping behind the trees, turning the forest dark faster than we expected. The woods felt heavier at night. The trees were tall and close together, blocking out the moon, and the air smelled damp and cold. We made a small fire, cooked dinner, and joked around like nothing was wrong. But every now and then, I'd catch myself staring past the firelight, trying to see between the trees. It felt like the darkness was thicker than it should have been. Around midnight, we put out the fire and zipped ourselves into the tents. Tyler and Mark shared one. I had my own. I lay on my back, listening to the forest settle, the crackle of dying embers, distant wind, an owl calling somewhere far away. Slowly, one by one, the normal sounds faded. Then, I heard footsteps. At first, they were faint, slow, careful. Leaves crunching under weight, too steady to be wind. I told myself it was an animal, but animals don't stop and start like that. Whatever it was, it walked a few steps, then paused, then walked again. It was circling the campsite. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps moved closer to my tent, stopping just outside the thin fabric. I could hear breathing, not heavy, not panicked, controlled, curious. Whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly where we were. I whispered Tyler's name. No answer. Then I heard the zipper on his tent shift slightly. From the outside. My heart slammed against my ribs. I forced myself to stay still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved again, this time toward their tent, then past it, continuing the slow circle. No flashlight, no voice, no warning. After what felt like hours, the sound stopped. The forest remained silent, unnaturally silent. No insects, no wind. Just 3 people lying awake in thin tents, too afraid to move. Morning came eventually. Gray light filtered through the trees. When we crawled out of the tents, none of us spoke at first. Around the campsite, the leaves were disturbed, pressed flat in a wide circle. Footprints, but not clear enough to identify. Too large to be an animal, too bare to be boots. Tyler finally broke the silence. He said he'd heard breathing right next to his head. Mark admitted he'd been holding his knife all night, convinced something would cut through the tent. We packed up, without breakfast, and left. I still camp, but I never sleep deep in the forest anymore. And when I hear slow footsteps outside my tent, measured, deliberate, I don't wait to see what's making them. Because some things don't hunt. They observe. I picked this trail because it was supposed to be easy.
A simple overnight hike in a state forest in Northern California. Well marked, well traveled, nothing extreme. I printed the map at home, checked the weather, told a friend where I was going. I wasn't reckless. That's important to understand, because what happened can't be explained as a mistake. I reached the trailhead just after noon. The parking lot had only 2 cars, both dusty, both empty. A wooden sign listed the trail name and the distance: 8 miles to the lake, 4 miles in, camp overnight, 4 miles back out. Simple. The forest was quiet but normal. Birds calling, wind in the canopy. The path was clear beneath my boots. About 2 hours in, I noticed something small but strange. The forest felt repetitive. The same fallen log appeared twice. The same crooked pine leaned over the trail in a way that felt familiar. I stopped, turned around, and checked the map. According to it, I was exactly where I should be. I kept going. By late afternoon, the light shifted, stretching shadows across the trail. I should have reached the lake by then, but instead the path narrowed and the trees grew closer together. The air felt heavier, like the forest was pressing in. When I checked my phone, the compass spun wildly, never settling. That's when I saw the sign. It was old, wooden, half-rotted, nailed to a tree just off the trail. No official markings, no trail number, just 3 words carved deep into the wood. "You are late." I laughed at first, nervous laughter, someone's idea of a joke. But the map didn't show any junctions here. And when I turned around, the trail behind me looked different, narrower, less worn, like it hadn't been walked in a long time. I camped early that night, too uneasy to keep moving. As darkness fell, the forest changed. The usual nighttime sounds never started. No insects, no owls, nothing. Just the soft shifting of trees, as if they were adjusting themselves. Sometime after midnight, I woke to light. Not moonlight, firelight. I sat up and saw it flickering between the trees, far off, steady and controlled. A campfire. I felt relief flood through me. Other people meant safety, answers. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward it, calling out. No response. The fire sat in a small clearing, perfectly built, burning strong, but no one was there. No gear, no sleeping bags, just the fire. I noticed footprints around it, pressed deep into the dirt, circling the flames again and again, like someone had been pacing for hours. I backed away. When I returned to my campsite, my tent was gone. Not collapsed, not torn. Gone. So was my backpack. In its place, neatly stacked, were my boots, my jacket, and the printed map. I picked the map up with shaking hands. New markings had been added, red lines looping in tight circles, all ending at one spot: the lake. Morning came fast, too fast. Sunlight filtered through the trees, warm and calm as if nothing was wrong. The trail was wide again, clear, familiar. I followed it and reached the lake in less than 10 minutes. The parking lot was full. Families, kids, dogs. When I reached my car, my phone exploded with notifications. Missed calls, messages. My friend had contacted the park rangers. According to them, I'd been missing for 3 days. I never told anyone about the sign, or the fire, or the map. But sometimes, when I check the time and realize I'm running late, I swear I can smell smoke. I went camping alone to reset my head, far deeper into the forest than I should have, following an old dirt trail that barely showed up on my map, telling myself that isolation was the point. By late afternoon, the forest felt unusually still, not peaceful, just empty, like something had pressed mute on the world. I set up my tent near a small clearing and noticed strange markings carved into a few nearby trees. Shallow lines, too organized to be animal scratches, but too weathered to be recent. I ignored them, built a fire, and cooked dinner as the sky darkened faster than expected. When night fell, it came all at once, thick and heavy, and the firelight barely reached the tree line. That's when I realized the forest didn't sound like a forest anymore. No insects, no wind, just a low, constant hum, almost like distant breathing. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, not circling, not approaching, just pacing somewhere beyond the light. I stayed still, telling myself it was a deer, until the steps stopped exactly where the trees began, just out of sight. After a long pause, something heavy dragged across the ground, followed by the smell of damp soil, like something had been dug up. My fire flickered violently, and then settled, casting shadows that didn't match the movement of the flames. I decided to retreat into my tent and wait for morning, but as I zipped it closed, I noticed something wrong. The zipper was already warm, as if someone had just touched it from the outside. I lay there for hours, barely breathing, listening to the forest shift around me, trees creaking in patterns that felt intentional. At some point, exhaustion took over. When I woke up, faint morning light filtered through the fabric, and the forest was alive again, with birds and wind, as if nothing had happened. Relieved, I stepped outside and froze. My campsite was no longer in a clearing. Overnight, the trees had moved closer, their trunks now only a few feet from my tent, forming a tight ring around it. The carvings I had seen earlier now covered every tree, deeper and fresher, all at the same height, like something had walked around my camp all night, marking its boundary. In the center of the clearing, where my fire had been, the ground was hollowed out into a shallow pit, lined with leaves placed carefully, almost respectfully. I packed my gear in silence and followed the trail back, except the trail didn't lead out anymore. It looped. Every time I walked for what felt like an hour, I ended up back at the same clearing, the same trees, the same markings. Panic set in. I tried running in a random direction, pushing through branches until my arms bled, only to stumble back into the ring again. As the sun climbed higher, the forest grew quieter, shadows sharpening instead of fading. That's when I noticed something carved beneath the others, smaller and newer. My name. I don't remember carving it. I don't remember telling anyone where I was going. I don't remember leaving the forest. I only remember waking up days later in a hospital, dehydrated, covered in dirt, found wandering on a highway miles away. The police said I was lucky, but sometimes, late at night when my room is quiet enough, I hear that same low hum, and I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and the smell of damp soil in my lungs, like part of me never actually left that clearing. I live in a small town off Highway 17, the kind of place people pass through without stopping. We have one diner, one gas station, and a church that still rings its bell even though almost no one attends anymore. Nights here are usually filled with background noise, cars in the distance, wind in the trees, the buzz of power lines. That's why I noticed immediately when all of it stopped. It was 1:17 a.m. when the silence hit. Not gradually, instantly. My ceiling fan froze mid-spin. The hum of my refrigerator vanished. Even the crickets outside went quiet. At first, I thought the power had gone out, but the lights were still on. The silence felt wrong, thick, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stepped onto my front porch and looked down the street. Every house was dark, but every window was open. Curtains moved slightly, even though there was no wind. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one awake. I could feel it. People standing just inside their homes, staring out, listening. None of us were speaking, but somehow we were all aware of the same thing. Then, I heard it. At first, it sounded like distant radio static, but it slowly turned into whispers. They weren't coming from one place, they were coming from everywhere. From the trees, from under the road, from inside my own walls. The voices didn't sound threatening, they sounded familiar, like they already knew my name, like they had been waiting for me to hear them. My phone buzzed in my hand. No signal, no missed calls, just a single message from an unknown number. If you listen, it listens back. That's when I understood something that still keeps me awake at night. The silence wasn't empty, it was intentional. Something beneath this town had finally gotten our attention. And once you hear it, it doesn't let you forget. I took the night shift at the roadside motel because it paid a little extra and no one else wanted it. The building sat just off an interstate in rural Montana, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and long stretches of empty road. During the day, it looked harmless. Peeling paint, flickering vacancy sign, soda machine that barely worked. At night, it felt like the world ended right outside the parking lot. Most nights were the same. Truckers checking in after midnight, tired families passing through, the low hum of the vending machines keeping me company. I spent hours behind the front desk, drinking bad coffee and watching the security monitors. The cameras were old, grainy, black and white, and half of them didn't work. Management promised repairs, but they always said that. Around 2:40 a.m., the phone rang. It startled me because no one ever called the front desk at that hour. Guests either slept or complained in person. I picked up expecting someone to ask for towels or directions. Instead, I heard breathing. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to be noticed. I asked if I could help them. The breathing stopped. Then a man's voice came through the line. Calm, flat. He asked, "Are you alone right now?" I didn't answer. I hung up, annoyed more than scared. Probably a drunk prank call. That's what I told myself. But when I checked the call log, there was nothing there. No incoming call, no missed number. It was like the phone had never rung at all. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Same breathing, same pause. This time the voice said, "You didn't answer the question." My stomach tightened. I told him this was a private line and hung up again. My hands were shaking now, and I hated that I was reacting this way. I'd dealt with weird people before. This shouldn't have bothered me as much as it did. I pulled up the parking lot camera. Empty. Not a single car. No headlights on the road. The motel felt sealed off, like we were the only building left in the state. The phone rang a third time. I didn't pick it up. The ringing stopped on its own. A second later, the security monitor flickered. One of the dead cameras, hallway C, came to life. The image was grainy, but I could see the carpet, the doors, and the emergency exit at the far end. Someone was standing there. He wasn't facing the camera. He stood completely still, his back to the lens, as if he knew exactly where it was. He didn't move. He didn't fidget. He just stood there, waiting. I grabbed the radio and called out for the maintenance worker who sometimes slept in his truck overnight. No response. I checked the guest list. No one was assigned to hallway C. No one had been for days. The phone rang again. This time, when I answered, the man spoke immediately. "I told you not to leave me waiting." I asked him where he was. My voice cracked despite my effort to stay calm.
He laughed softly like I'd asked something funny. "I'm closer than you think," he said. "You've already seen me." The hallway camera went dark. I locked the front desk door and backed into the office, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The phone kept ringing, over and over. I let it ring. Each time it stopped, I thought it was over. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving across the lobby floor. I watched the door handle from the office as it turned slightly, testing the lock. The man didn't knock. He didn't force it. He just stood there, breathing on the other side, like he had all the time in the world. The phone rang one last time. When I finally quit that job, the manager told me something I wish he hadn't. He said the night shift phones sometimes acted strange, calls with no record, voices with no source. He said the previous clerk had taken a call just like mine. They never found him. I got stranded during a winter drive through northern Colorado, somewhere between a closed rest stop and a town that barely existed on the map. Snow had been falling lightly all evening, but around midnight it turned into a white wall. My headlights felt useless, swallowed by the storm. When my car finally slid into a shallow ditch, I didn't panic at first. I'd grown up in places like this. I thought I knew what to do. I tried calling for help. No signal, not even one bar. The radio gave me nothing but static. I sat there for a while, engine running, heater blasting, watching snow stack up against the windshield faster than I liked. After 15 minutes, I realized staying in the car wasn't going to help. If the exhaust pipe got blocked, I wouldn't wake up. So I stepped outside. The cold hit like a slap. Wind howled through the trees, bending them low, making the forest groan and creak like it was alive. I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. That's when I noticed a light in the distance, steady, warm and yellow. A cabin, or maybe a ranger station. Either way, it was better than freezing alone in my car. The walk felt longer than it should have. Every step was heavy, snow pulling at my boots, the wind erasing my footprints almost as soon as I made them. The light never seemed to get closer. Still, I kept going, because the alternative didn't feel like an option. When I finally reached the building, I realized it wasn't a cabin. It was an old hunting lodge, half buried in snow, wood darkened with age and weather. No vehicles, no tracks, just one light on inside. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the lodge was warm, too warm. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, freshly fed. Boots lined the wall near the entrance. Wet boots. Someone was here. I called out. My voice sounded small in the open space. No response. The place smelled like coffee and damp wool. A pot sat on the stove, still warm. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. That's when I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Every window was covered, not boarded, covered. Heavy blankets nailed into the frames, blocking any view outside. It felt less like shelter and more like a place designed not to be seen into or out of. I started backing toward the door when I heard movement upstairs. Slow footsteps, not hurried, not surprised, just steady, patient steps, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I hid behind the kitchen counter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The lights went out, not all at once, one by one, until the lodge was lit only by the fire, shadows crawling across the walls. I held my breath, listening.
Then I heard it. Someone breathing from the darkness behind me. I ran. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember the cold hitting me again. I just remember running through the snow, blind, lungs burning, convinced I'd made a mistake that I wouldn't survive. When I finally reached my car, the storm had eased. The road was visible again. I drove until my hands went numb and my mind couldn't replay the sounds anymore. Rescue found me the next morning. When I told them about the lodge, they went quiet. One of them finally said there hadn't been a hunting lodge in those woods for over 20 years. It burned down. They never found footprints in the snow, except mine.
I never planned on stopping at that house. My name is Evan, and at the time I was driving back from a job interview that went nowhere. Another polite rejection, another smile that didn't reach the eyes. The rain started just after sunset, sudden and heavy, turning the narrow village road into a black ribbon of water. My phone had no signal. The fuel warning light came on. That's when I saw the house. It sat alone at the edge of the village, half hidden behind dead trees and overgrown hedges, its windows dark but intact. Unlike the other abandoned places I'd passed, this one didn't look broken, just waiting. Everyone in the village knew about it. They called it the listening house. No one could ever explain why. My car finally died a few meters past the gate. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, listening to rain drum against the roof. The silence around me felt wrong, too complete, as if the world ended at the tree line. I grabbed my bag and walked back. The front door stood slightly open. It wasn't forced, it wasn't damaged, just open. Inside, the air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic, like rusted iron after rain. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my weight, but the sound didn't fade. It lingered, stretched, as if the house was repeating it to itself. I closed the door behind me. The rain outside became quieter instantly. Not gone, just muted, like the house had swallowed the sound. I told myself it was thick walls. Old buildings do that. I chose the living room. A couch sat perfectly centered, fabric faded but clean. A coffee table stood in front of it with a thin layer of dust untouched by footprints. Everything looked arranged deliberately, like a stage set waiting for actors who never arrived. I sat down. The couch sighed beneath me. And then, a knock. Not from the door, from the wall behind my head. I stood up so fast, the couch rocked backward. "Hello?" I called out, forcing confidence into my voice. No answer. Just rain. And then another sound. Soft creaking from upstairs. I took a step forward. The floor creaked again, but this time it didn't come from under my feet. It came from above me. Same timing, same tone. I froze. When I stepped back, the sound followed, closer now, heavier, as if someone else was matching my movement from the second floor. My throat went dry. I laughed, short and nervous. "Old house," I muttered. "Just an old house." That's when I noticed the staircase. Wet footprints were forming on the steps. One by one. Each print appeared with a faint splash, water dripping down the wood as if fresh rain were falling from invisible shoes. They moved downward, slowly, deliberately, towards where I stood. I backed away. The footprints didn't stop. A whisper filled the room, not loud, not directional,
everywhere. You came back early. My heart hammered in my chest. I've never been here before. The house creaked softly, as if amused. Everyone says that. I ran for the front door. It wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door didn't move. Behind me, wet footsteps splashed onto the living room floor. The smell of rain grew stronger, colder, mixed with decay. I felt breath on my neck, cold, damp, a voice inches from my ear. Don't stop now. The lights flickered. For a split second, I saw the room as it truly was, walls swollen with moisture, handprints pressed from the inside, shadows standing where no people should be. Then, silence. The rain outside returned to normal. The door opened easily. I didn't look back. I walked until sunrise. The villagers didn't seem surprised when I told them where I'd been. An old man only nodded. It listens, he said, and once it learns you, it doesn't forget. I moved away a month later, but some nights when rain hits my windows just right, I hear it. 3 soft knocks from inside my walls, and somewhere far away, a house answering back. I had missed every other train that evening. My name is James, and I was returning from a conference in the city. Exhausted, my umbrella broken, my bag heavy with papers I barely cared about. The storm had started early, the rain falling in sharp sheets, bouncing off the pavements and pooling in the streets. I arrived at the small, near-empty station an hour before the last train was supposed to depart. Or so I thought. The station was older than I remembered from childhood trips. A crumbling roof sagging in places, metal benches slick with rain, and flickering lamps that cast long shadows across the wet concrete. My shoes squelched with each step, echoing against the high ceiling. Every taxi in town had gone. The few waiting passengers had scattered, and the sound of my own breathing felt unusually loud. I glanced at the platform sign. Platform 6. It was outdated, the paint peeling. A faint chill ran down my spine. Then, without warning, the train arrived. Not a screech, not a whistle, not even a rumble. Just an ancient metal carriage that slid silently onto the tracks, water streaming down its dark windows. Its presence felt deliberate, almost predatory. The doors slid open with a hiss. There was no conductor, no ticket inspector. Only seats lined with strangers, pale and silent, staring straight ahead, unmoving. The air inside smelled damp and musty, with a faint tinge of something old, like forgotten basements and moldy fabric. Hesitant, I stepped inside. The doors closed behind me with a soft click, and the train began to move. Outside, the rain hit the carriage windows, but the world beyond didn't look familiar. Streetlights and buildings flickered like reflections in water, and everything seemed tilted, off balance. I tried to speak to a man across the aisle, but his eyes were hollow, glassy, unseeing. Everyone was silent, yet I felt them watching me in a way that was impossible. I checked the route map mounted above the seats. No stations were listed. Instead, one word blinked faintly in red. Returning. My stomach twisted. Returning where? I whispered to no one. A woman in the seat ahead turned her head slowly toward me, her face pale, wet strands of hair clinging to her cheeks. "This is the way we went," she said softly, "not the way back." The lights flickered. For a split second, I saw shadowy forms behind every seat, stretching unnaturally, silent and dripping. My heartbeat raced as I tried the doors. They wouldn't open. The man across from me grabbed my wrist. His hand was icy, wet, and clammy. "We tried that," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "It didn't like it." The train slowed. Outside, there was no station, no familiar cityscape, only water, flooded streets, half-submerged buildings, and the endless pounding of rain. One by one, the passengers rose, walking calmly to the doors. When they stepped into the flood outside, they vanished without a sound, as if swallowed by the storm itself. I froze as the doors in front of me stayed shut. A voice echoed softly through the carriage. "Not yet." My throat tightened. The next thing I knew, I was waking up at platform 6, soaked, my bag dripping, the train nowhere in sight. The rain had returned to normal, the station empty. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the sound of water dripping on the floor, footsteps approaching from nowhere, and the faint, impossible hiss of a train sliding silently onto tracks that don't exist. I checked into the hotel because it was cheap and close to the highway, the kind of place people stay when they don't plan on remembering the night. My name is Noah, and I was traveling alone for work, moving from city to city, living out of a suitcase. The rain had followed me all day, clinging to the car windows, blurring the road into streaks of gray. By the time I reached the hotel, I just wanted a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. The lobby lights were dim, buzzing faintly above a worn reception desk. The woman behind it looked tired, too tired. When she handed me the key, her fingers hesitated for just a second longer than necessary. "4th floor," she said quietly. Then, almost as an afterthought, "If you hear the rain, don't open the door." I nodded, confused. It was already raining outside. The elevator didn't go to the 4th floor. I had to take the stairs. With each step, the air grew colder, heavier, and the smell of damp carpet thickened. The hallway lights on the 4th floor flickered, and the corridor seemed longer than it should have been. Room 403 skipped to 405. Room 404 sat between them. The door opened easily. Inside, the room looked normal, too normal. A neatly made bed, a desk with an unplugged lamp, curtains drawn tight over the windows. Everything was dry, clean, quiet, but the air smelled unmistakably of rain. The sound was coming from the bathroom. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling into the bathtub, each drop echoing louder than it should have, like the room was hollow behind the walls. I turned the faucet. No water. Turned it again. Nothing. The dripping continued anyway. I told myself it was a plumbing issue. Old buildings have them. I closed the bathroom door and lay down on the bed, listening to rain tap against the hotel windows outside. Then the rain changed. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. I heard it moving inside the walls, sliding, flowing, circling the room. It traveled from the ceiling to the floor, from the hallway wall to the bathroom, like something liquid and alive, searching. Then came the knock. Slow, wet, from the bathroom door. I held my breath. "Go away," I whispered. The knocking stopped. Relief washed over me, too quickly. A voice followed, soft and close, seeping through the door like mist.
You opened it once before. My head throbbed as memories flooded in, memories that didn't belong to me. Another guest, another night. Curiosity, a bathroom door opened when it shouldn't have been. Water pouring out, filling lungs, filling silence. The handle began to turn. I ran into the hallway, but the hallway wasn't there anymore. The doors were gone. The walls were swollen, damp, breathing gently, pulsing like something alive. Water streamed down from the ceiling, soaking the carpet, rising around my ankles. The sound of rain became deafening. Behind me, the bathroom door burst open. Water surged out, carrying shapes inside it, faces pressed against the surface, hands reaching, mouths opening and closing without sound. I felt them grabbing me, pulling me down, the rain filling my ears, my chest, my thoughts. I screamed and woke up in my own bed at home. Dry, quiet, morning light through the window. I laughed, shaking, telling myself it was just a dream, until I noticed my bathroom door was open, and from inside, I heard the sound of rain. I volunteer as a night dispatcher for emergency services in a small county. It's mostly quiet work, routine welfare checks, the occasional drunk driver, the kind of calls you can handle on autopilot after a while. You learn to listen for patterns, for panic, for the subtle differences between someone who's scared and someone who's lying. That night, though, the call didn't fit any pattern I knew. It came in just after 3 a.m., routed through our local line but flagged as unverified location. That alone was strange. Even bad cell connections usually ping somewhere. I answered with my standard greeting and waited. A man's voice came through, low and strained. He sounded older, maybe late 50s. He gave his address immediately, rattling it off like he'd practiced. Street name, number, zip code. I typed it in as he spoke. The system didn't recognize it. I asked him to repeat it. He did, slower this time, irritation creeping into his voice. I checked again. Nothing. No record of the street. I asked him what city he was in. He said the name of a town I knew well. Small, rural, nothing unusual. I pulled up the map manually and searched for the street. Still, nothing. I told him I was having trouble finding the address. He went quiet for a moment, then said, "That's not possible. The house has been here longer than I have." I asked him to describe where he was. He said he was in his living room. Said the lights were off because they attracted attention. I asked attention from who? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked how long help would take. I told him I needed a verified location before I could send anyone. My screen showed no movement, no tower data, no GPS drift, just a blank space where a call should be. It was like he was calling from somewhere that didn't exist anymore. Then he said something that made my hands stop moving. "They don't like it when you say the address out loud." I asked him to explain. He whispered now, like he was afraid the walls could hear him. He said the house used to be on maps, used to have neighbors, used to have a road leading to it. But over time, fewer people came by. Deliveries stopped, mail stopped, even the power company stopped recognizing the address. "They started showing up after that," he said. I asked who they were. He told me they weren't solid, not all the time, that they looked like silhouettes, darker than the dark, standing just outside the windows. He said they never came inside, but they listened, learned. As he spoke, I noticed something unsettling. The longer the call went on, the weaker his voice became. Not quieter, but thinner, like it was losing substance. At the same time, new sounds crept into the line. Wind, maybe, or something breathing very slowly. I told him to leave the house if he could. He laughed softly. "I tried that years ago," he said. "The road ends too early now."
The call timer ticked past 10 minutes. Still no traceable data. I flagged a supervisor, but even they couldn't pull a location. We were staring at a call that, according to our system, shouldn't exist. Then the man said, "They're closer tonight." I asked what he could see. He described shapes pressing against the windows, not touching the glass, just close enough to block out the stars. He said they were repeating things he'd said on past calls, phrases, complaints, even his own name, slowly, like they were practicing. Suddenly, another voice joined the line. It was the same man's voice, but calmer, smoother. "You don't need to send anyone. We're already here." The original voice cried out, the sound cutting off abruptly. The line stayed open, filled with that same low breathing. I shouted into the headset, but no one answered. The call ended on its own. We logged it as an unresolved incident. No address, no follow-up possible. A dead end. But every now and then, during quiet nights, I'll see the same street name appear briefly in our system, grayed out, unclickable, before disappearing again. And every time it does, I wonder if the house is still there, or if it's finally been completely forgotten.
I was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m. That's what the report said, at least. Acute respiratory failure. 3 minutes without a pulse before the paramedics brought me back. I don't remember the moment my heart stopped. What I remember is the silence right before it did. Thick, complete, like the world had shut its eyes. I'd collapsed alone in my apartment, chest tight, lungs refusing to cooperate. I remember crawling toward my phone, knocking it off the table, the screen lighting up as it hit the floor. I tried to dial 911. My fingers were shaking too badly to see what I was pressing. Then, everything went dark. When I woke up in the hospital, they told me I was lucky, that if help had arrived even a minute later, I wouldn't have made it. I believed them. I thanked everyone. I tried not to think too hard about how close I'd come to not existing. It wasn't until weeks later that something didn't add up. I was reviewing medical paperwork for insurance when I noticed a line item under emergency communications. There was a call listed, outgoing from my phone, timestamped at 2:21 a.m., 4 minutes after I was declared clinically dead. I assumed it was a typo. I checked my phone records. The call was there too. Duration, 2 minutes, 46 seconds. Recipient, emergency services. No recording attached. I called my carrier. They confirmed the call happened, but couldn't explain how. According to network data, my phone had been stationary on my apartment floor the entire time. No movement, no interaction. Yet the call connected, stayed open, and ended normally. Curiosity turned into dread when I requested the dispatch log. The operator's notes were brief but chilling. Caller unresponsive. Breathing detected. No verbal response. Line remains open. Breathing. I listened to the audio file next. At first, there was only static. Then faint breathing, slow, uneven, wet. Not the sound of someone struggling to breathe, but someone who didn't remember how anymore. Every few seconds, there was a soft clicking noise, like a tongue pressing against teeth, trying to form words. Near the end of the recording, something else happened. A voice spoke. It was mine. Not panicked, not weak, calm, clear. He's not ready. Send them anyway. The breathing stopped immediately after. I couldn't finish the recording. I asked the paramedics if they'd heard anything when they arrived. They exchanged looks before telling me something they hadn't included in the report. When they entered my apartment, my phone was on the floor, screen lit, call active, and my voice was coming from the speaker, repeating my address over and over.
They thought it was a glitch, a dying phone looping audio. They ended the call when they shut the device off. Here's the part I don't tell people. Since that night, emergency services have called me twice. Both times, there was no one on the line, just breathing. And once, just once, I heard my own voice again, whispering calmly, "Not yet." I used to work night shifts at home. The kind of job where your hours slowly drift later and later until midnight feels normal. That night, I was alone in my apartment. Rain tapping lightly against the windows, the city outside unusually quiet. Around 1:30 a.m., my phone rang. No caller ID. I almost ignored it. Anyone who needed me knew not to call that late. But something about the timing, the way the ringtone cut cleanly through the silence, made me answer. Hello? At first, there was only static. Then I heard breathing. Shallow, panicked, like someone trying not to cry. I pulled the phone away from my ear to check the screen, thinking it might be a pocket dial, but the call was still active. "Can you hear me?" a woman whispered. I said yes and asked if she was okay. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I don't have much time," she said. Her voice trembled, not with hysteria, but with restraint, like she was afraid of being overheard. I asked where she was. She hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "I thought this was 911. That made my stomach drop. I told her she hadn't reached emergency services. She cursed softly under her breath and started breathing faster. I told her to hang up and dial again. She said she couldn't. "I already tried," she whispered. "It keeps coming back to you." I asked what was wrong. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "If I stop talking, it means he's close." The rain outside grew heavier, the sound filling the gaps in the conversation. I could hear faint noises on her end, floorboards creaking, something scraping lightly, like furniture being nudged. I told her to leave the house if she could. She laughed bitterly. "I tried that earlier," she said. "That's when he noticed." I asked who he was. Another pause. Then she said, "I don't think he's a person." I stayed on the line, heart pounding, trying to keep her talking while I searched for a way to trace the call. My phone showed no location data, no carrier info. It was like the call existed in isolation. Suddenly, she went silent. I called her name. She'd never told me her name, but I called anyway. For several seconds, all I heard was static. Then a new sound came through. Slow footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. They didn't sound like they were on a phone speaker. They sounded close, like they were in my room. I froze. Then she whispered, barely audible. "It learned my voice." The line filled with a low hum, and then my own voice spoke. "Hello?" It was perfect. My tone, my cadence, even the slight hesitation I have when I answer unfamiliar calls. I dropped the phone instinctively like it had burned me. The call didn't end. The voice repeated itself. Closer this time. I ended the call and turned my phone off completely. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I powered the phone back on. No missed calls. No call history. Nothing. I convinced myself exhaustion had finally caught up to me. Until that night. At 1:30 a.m. exactly, my phone rang again. Same ringtone. Same silence when I answered. But this time, the voice didn't ask for help. It just said, calmly,
You should have hung up sooner. I changed my number the next day. New phone, new carrier. I don't answer unknown calls anymore. Still, sometimes. Late at night, when rain hits the windows just right, I swear I can hear my phone ringing. Even when it's powered off. A couple months ago, I agreed to house sit for a coworker while he and his family were on vacation in Colorado. His place was about 40 minutes outside the city, tucked in a quiet neighborhood where the houses were big and the streets were mostly empty after dark. It sounded like an easy week. Feed the dog, water a few plants, and collect the mail. He even offered to pay me a couple $100 for it, which was more than enough motivation. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was how quiet the house felt. Not peaceful quiet, more like the kind where every little sound stands out. The fridge humming in the kitchen, the air vents pushing air through the ducts. Even the dog, a golden retriever named Max, seemed restless. He followed me everywhere the first day, never wandering far from my side. The house itself was huge. 2 floors, a finished basement, and a long hallway that led to the bedrooms. My coworker had told me to just stay in the guest room, so I dropped my bag there and spent most of the evening in the living room watching TV while rain rolled in outside. Around midnight, Max started staring at the hallway. Not barking, not growling, just staring. At first, I thought he heard something outside, maybe a raccoon or the wind moving branches, but then he slowly walked down the hallway toward the basement door. He sat there, looking at it like he was waiting for someone to open it. I got up and followed him. The basement door was locked. There was a keypad on the wall next to it, the kind that needed a 4-digit code. I remembered my coworker mentioning the basement in passing, saying it was mostly storage and I didn't need to go down there. So I didn't think much of it at first. I told Max to come back to the living room, but he refused. He kept sitting in front of the door like he was guarding it. Eventually, I just went back to the couch. About 20 minutes later, I heard something. A dull thump. It came from the basement. I muted the TV and waited. The house was completely silent again. I told myself it was probably pipes or the heater kicking on. Old houses make noises all the time. But then it happened again. Another thump. Heavier this time. Max stood up immediately and walked back to the basement door. I followed him again, my heart beating a little faster now. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. Then, very slowly, the doorknob turned. Just a little. Not enough to open the door, but enough that I saw it move. I jumped back. There was no way anyone was down there. My coworker had left days ago, and the security system would have alerted us if someone broke in. I checked the keypad. Still locked. I tried texting my coworker to ask what the code was, but it was late, and he didn't respond. So I did what most people would do. I tried a few obvious numbers. Nothing worked. Behind the door, something scraped against the floor. Max let out a low whine. I backed away and decided to leave it alone. Maybe something had fallen over down there. Maybe the house had settled. Either way, I wasn't about to start messing with locked doors in someone else's house at 1 in the morning. I went upstairs and locked the guest room door. But the noises didn't stop. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not loud ones, slow ones, directly under the floor, moving back and forth across the basement ceiling. I barely slept that night. The next morning, my coworker finally texted back. I asked him casually what the basement code was. He responded almost immediately. Why? I told him I thought something had fallen over down there. There was a long pause before his next message. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. There shouldn't be anyone down there. I told him I knew that. I just wanted to check. Another long pause. Finally, he replied, "The basement doesn't have a keypad." I walked down the hallway and looked at the wall next to the door. The keypad was gone. Just 4 small screw holes where it had been. And the basement door was slightly open.
Last winter, a friend from college asked if I could house sit for her while she and her husband visited family in Oregon. They lived in a quiet suburb outside Seattle, one of those neighborhoods where every house looks almost identical and nothing really happens after 10 p.m. It sounded like the easiest money I'd make all month. All I had to do was feed the cat, bring in packages, and keep the lights on so the house didn't look empty. The first couple of days were completely normal. Their house was clean, modern, and honestly nicer than my apartment. There was a big living room with glass doors that looked out into a fenced backyard, a long kitchen island, and a staircase that led to the bedrooms upstairs. The cat mostly ignored me except when it was hungry, and the neighborhood was so quiet at night that I could hear the wind moving through the trees outside. On the third night, I noticed the camera. It was sitting on the bookshelf in the living room. At first, I thought it was one of those smart home security cameras, but it didn't look like the typical ones you see mounted in corners. This one was small and black, about the size of a GoPro, sitting on a tiny tripod pointed directly toward the couch. I didn't remember seeing it before. I texted my friend and asked if they had installed a camera recently. She replied a few minutes later saying no. She said the only cameras they had were the doorbell cam and one in the garage. So I figured maybe it belonged to them and she just forgot about it. Still, it made me a little uncomfortable. Later that night while watching TV, I kept catching myself looking at it. It was just sitting there quietly, the small lens facing the room like an eye that never blinked. At some point around midnight, I got up to grab water from the kitchen. When I came back, the camera had moved. Not a lot, just a few inches, but it was now pointed directly at the hallway leading to the stairs. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had bumped the shelf earlier. Maybe the tripod shifted slightly. Still, it bothered me enough that I picked it up. There was no brand name on it, no markings at all, just a tiny power button and a memory card slot. The memory card was already inside. Curiosity got the better of me. I took the card out and slid it into my laptop. There were dozens of video files. Most of them were short, 2 or 3 minutes long, and every single one of them was recorded inside the house. But not when I was there. The timestamps went back weeks. Video after video showed the living room empty during the day, the kitchen at night, the hallway in complete darkness. Then I noticed something worse. Some of the videos were recorded while my friend and her husband were home. You could see them walking through the living room, sitting on the couch, watching TV. They had no idea they were being filmed. The camera angle kept changing slightly between clips. Sometimes it was on the bookshelf, sometimes on the coffee table. Once it was sitting on the staircase, looking down into the living room. Whoever owned the camera had been moving it around the house, watching them. I felt sick. I immediately texted my friend again and asked if anyone else had access to the house. Maybe a cleaner, a contractor, a neighbor with a spare key. She said no. No one. That's when I heard a noise upstairs. A soft creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. I froze. The cat was sitting on the couch next to me, staring up at the ceiling. The house was supposed to be empty, except for me. I grabbed my phone and slowly walked toward the staircase. The lights upstairs were off, so the hallway at the top looked like a dark tunnel. Another creak. I called out, asking if someone was there. No response. I climbed the stairs one step at a time. Every room door was closed, except the guest room I'd been sleeping in. As I got closer, I realized the door was slightly open, just a few inches. I pushed it open slowly. The room looked exactly the way I left it, except for one thing. Another camera was sitting on the dresser, pointed directly at the bed. I grabbed my bag and left the house that night. The police came the next day to check the place. They searched every room, every closet, even the attic and crawl spaces. They didn't find anyone. But when they checked the backyard fence, they noticed something strange. A small section behind the house had been cut open and carefully tied back together with thin wire, like someone had been coming and going through it. The officers said whoever placed those cameras had probably been inside the house many times, watching, learning routines, waiting for the right moment. What still bothers me the most, though, is something I noticed when I reviewed the last video on that memory card. It was recorded the night I found the camera. The angles showed the living room couch. You could see me sitting there earlier that evening, watching TV. But the camera wasn't on the bookshelf when that video was recorded. The angle was lower, much lower, like it had been sitting on the floor.
About 2 years ago, I house sat for a couple who lived in a small town outside Denver. They were friends of a coworker and needed someone to stay at their place for a week while they were visiting family in Canada. The job sounded simple: feed the dog, take out the trash on Thursday, and keep the place occupied so it didn't look empty. Their house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood where the streetlights were spaced far apart, so at night the road outside was mostly dark. The backyard faced a strip of woods that ran behind several houses on the block. During the day, it felt peaceful, but at night, the area felt strangely isolated. The couple gave me a quick tour before they left. Kitchen, living room, guest bedroom, bathroom, nothing unusual. They also handed me 2 keys, one for the front door and one for the back sliding door that led to the patio. I remember them mentioning something specific before leaving. They said, "We only have those 2 keys, so just keep them with you." At the time, that seemed like a normal thing to say. The first 2 nights were completely uneventful. I'd feed the dog, watch some TV, maybe play games on my laptop, and then head to bed around midnight. The dog, a big German shepherd named Luna, usually slept near the front door. On the 3rd night, I came home from grabbing takeout around 10 p.m. The house looked normal. Lights were off, just like I left them. But when I opened the door, Luna was already in the hallway. That was strange, because she normally stayed near the living room window when I wasn't home. I figured maybe she heard my car pull in. I fed her and sat down in the living room to eat. Everything felt normal again until I got up to throw away the food container. That's when I noticed the back door. It was unlocked. I knew for a fact I had locked it earlier that day when I let Luna out in the backyard. At first, I assumed I just forgot, but when I checked the lock, it was already turned open, like someone had used a key. I stood there for a while, trying to remember if I had actually locked it. The longer I thought about it, the less sure I became. So I locked it again and went back to the couch. Around midnight, Luna started growling. Not barking, just a low, deep growl while staring toward the kitchen. I turned the TV volume down and listened. Nothing. The house was completely silent. I walked into the kitchen to see what she was looking at. Everything seemed normal until I noticed the drawer near the sink. It was open slightly. That drawer held random kitchen stuff: scissors, tape, batteries. I was pretty sure I hadn't used it at all. Still, I closed it and went back to the living room. About an hour later, I heard something that made my stomach drop. The sound of keys. It was faint but unmistakable, the soft metallic jingle of keys moving together. It came from the front door. Luna jumped to her feet immediately. I slowly walked toward the hallway and looked at the door. The handle moved, just slightly. Then it stopped. I stood there frozen, barely breathing. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps on the porch outside. Slow ones, walking away. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I checked the front door lock carefully. There were no signs of damage, no scratches, or anything that suggested someone tried to force it open. But something else caught my attention. There were faint, muddy footprints on the porch. Just one set, standing directly in front of the door. Later that day, I texted the homeowners and asked if anyone else had a key to the house, maybe a neighbor or family member. They replied almost immediately, "No, just the two we gave you." I told them what happened, and they suggested maybe someone was trying the wrong house by mistake. I tried to believe that explanation, but the next night proved it wasn't a mistake. Around 1 a.m., Luna started growling again, this time at the back door. I walked into the kitchen and saw the handle slowly turn. The door didn't open because I had locked it, but whoever was outside clearly had a key. The lock just didn't turn all the way. The handle stopped. Then I heard someone whisper through the glass, very quietly, "Wrong key." After that, the footsteps slowly walked away into the backyard. The homeowners came back 2 days later and immediately changed every lock in the house. But while the locksmith was replacing the front door lock, he said something strange. He asked them why there were scratches around the keyhole, the kind that happen when someone tries multiple keys that don't fit. He also said something else. Whoever tried those keys had been standing there for a long time.
A couple years ago, I installed a cheap security camera in my apartment. Nothing fancy, just one of those small indoor cameras you can connect to your phone. I mainly bought it because my landlord kept letting maintenance workers into the apartment when I wasn't home, and I wanted to know when someone came inside. The camera sat on a shelf in my living room, pointing toward the front door and part of the hallway. After a while, I stopped paying attention to it because nothing interesting ever happened. The footage was always the same, me leaving for work in the morning, coming home at night, maybe the occasional maintenance guy stopping by. Eventually, I forgot the camera was even there. About 6 months later, I had to travel for work for a few days. The trip wasn't planned very well, and I ended up leaving my apartment in a rush. I packed my bag, locked the door, and drove to the airport without thinking about anything else. The first night I was gone, I got a motion notification from the camera. At first, I didn't think much of it. My landlord sometimes entered the apartment for inspections, so I figured it was probably just that. But when I opened the camera app, the video showed something strange. The video started with the front door opening slowly. That part was normal. What wasn't normal was that no one walked in. The door just opened halfway and stayed there for almost 30 seconds. Then it slowly closed again. I replayed the clip 3 times, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Maybe the door hadn't shut properly when I left and the wind pushed it open. But my door opened inward. Wind wouldn't be able to pull it open like that. I tried to forget about it and went to bed. The next morning, I checked the camera again out of curiosity. That's when I noticed another motion alert from around 3:14 a.m. I opened the video. The living room lights were off, so the camera had switched to night vision. Everything looked gray and slightly distorted. At first, the room looked empty. Then I noticed movement in the hallway. Something was slowly stepping backward into the frame. Not walking normally, stepping backward, like someone was leaving the living room but facing the wrong direction. A man slowly appeared on the screen. He was barefoot, wearing dark clothes, and he was staring directly at the camera. But the weirdest part was the way he moved. Instead of turning around to walk down the hallway, he kept stepping backward while facing the camera the entire time. Just staring. The footage lasted about 10 seconds before he disappeared down the hallway. My stomach dropped. No one was supposed to be in my apartment. I immediately called my landlord, but it was early morning and he didn't answer. I spent the next few hours replaying that clip over and over again, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Then I noticed something that made it even worse. The man wasn't actually looking at the camera. His eyes were slightly above it, like he was looking at something behind the camera. That's when I remembered something. Behind the camera was my bedroom door. I checked the camera app again to see if there were any other recordings. There was one more. recorded only 2 minutes after the man disappeared down the hallway. I opened it. The bedroom door slowly creaked open. The camera couldn't see inside the room, but I could hear movement. Footsteps. Then the door slowly closed again. No one came back out. I ended up calling the police in my city and asking them to check my apartment. It took them about 2 hours to get there. When they finally called me back, the officer said the apartment was empty. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. Everything looked exactly the way I left it. I asked them to check the bedroom. The officer paused for a moment before answering. He said the room was empty too, but the closet door inside the bedroom was open. I told him I always keep that closet locked. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he asked me something I still think about. Do you know anyone who has a key to your apartment? I said, no. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Because according to the footage, the man never actually entered through the front door. A few years ago, I lived in a small neighborhood outside Phoenix. It was the kind of place where everyone had a driveway camera or one of those doorbell cameras pointed at the street. Most of the time, the footage was boring. People walking dogs, delivery trucks, kids riding bikes. But one night, something happened that still makes me uncomfortable to think about. It started when my neighbor texted me around 7 in the morning. He said, "Hey, were you outside around 3 a.m. last night?" I told him no, I had been asleep. I asked why. A few minutes later, he sent me a video from a security camera. The camera was mounted above his garage and pointed toward the street. You could see his driveway, part of my front yard, and the sidewalk that ran between our houses. The video started at 3:02 a.m. The street was completely empty. No cars, no people. Then I appeared. I was walking slowly down the sidewalk in front of my own house. The moment I saw it, I felt this weird mix of confusion and panic. I knew for a fact I had been asleep at that time. I'd gone to bed around midnight and didn't wake up until morning. But there I was on the camera, wearing the same clothes I had slept in, walking slowly past my neighbor's house. I watched the clip again more carefully. Something about the way I moved looked wrong. My arms were stiff at my sides, barely swinging. My steps were slow and uneven, almost like I wasn't fully awake. Then I noticed something else. My head wasn't moving. Most people naturally glance around when they walk down a dark street at night. But in the footage, my head stayed perfectly still the entire time, just facing forward. My neighbor texted again asking if everything was okay. I told him I must have been sleepwalking or something. But then he sent another message. Watch the end of the video. I played the clip again. At the end of the footage, I stopped walking right in front of my house. Then I slowly turned my head toward his camera, and I smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. My mouth opened wider than it should have, much wider, like my jaw was stretching too far. The video ended right after that. I immediately checked my phone's step tracker and sleep app. According to it, I hadn't moved at all during the night. My phone had stayed on my bedside table the entire time. Still, I went downstairs to check the front door. It was locked. The deadbolt was still in place. There was no way I could have left the house without unlocking it. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was dirt on the inside floor near the door. Fresh dirt, like someone had walked in from outside. I asked my neighbor if he had any other footage from that night. He said he did. Around 3:15 a.m., his camera picked up movement again. This time, it showed someone walking back the same direction I came from. But the person wasn't me. They were much taller, and they were walking directly behind me, close enough that they should have been visible in the first video. But in the earlier footage, I was completely alone. My neighbors said something else too.
When he first watched the video that morning, he only saw me. The tall figure behind me didn't appear until later when he checked the footage again. A few years ago, I moved into a small rental house on the edge of town. It was one of those quiet suburban areas where every house had a driveway, a small backyard, and the streets were empty after midnight. The previous tenant had left behind a basic security camera system, and the landlord told me I could keep using it if I wanted. There were 3 cameras connected to an app on my phone. One pointed at the front porch, one covered the driveway, and the third one was mounted inside the living room facing the hallway and back door. At first, I didn't care much about them. I left them on mostly because they were already installed, and occasionally I'd get a motion alert when a delivery driver walked up to the porch. Most nights, nothing happened. But about 2 months after I moved in, the cameras started sending alerts around the same time every night, 2:17 a.m. The first time it happened, I ignored it. The alert said, "Motion detected, driveway camera." I assumed it was just a stray cat or maybe headlights from a passing car triggering the sensor. The next night, it happened again, 2:17 a.m., same camera. This time, I opened the app to check the clip. The driveway looked completely empty. The camera had switched to night vision, so everything was gray and slightly grainy. My car was parked in the usual spot, and the street beyond it was silent. There was no movement at all. I figured the motion detection was just being overly sensitive. But the third night, it happened again, 2:17 a.m. This time, the alert came from the front porch camera. I opened the video. For the first few seconds, nothing happened, just the empty porch lit by the camera's night vision. Then something slowly moved into the frame. At first, I thought it was a person standing very close to the camera. But the more I watched it, the less sense it made. It looked like the shadow of someone standing just out of view, except there was no one there. The shadow moved across the porch floor slowly, like someone walking past the camera, but the person casting it never appeared. I replayed the clip at least 10 times. You could clearly see a human-shaped shadow moving across the porch, but the source of the shadow wasn't visible anywhere. The next morning, I checked outside. Nothing seemed unusual. No footprints, no signs that someone had been near the house. Still, the alerts kept happening. Every single night, 2:17 a.m. Sometimes the driveway camera would trigger, sometimes the porch camera. Once, the back camera sent an alert showing the back gate slowly opening even though it was locked with a chain. After about a week of this, I started staying awake around that time just to see what was going on. One night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring at my phone as the clock slowly approached 2:17. The house was completely silent. Then my phone buzzed. Motion detected, living room camera. That was impossible. I was sitting in the living room. I immediately opened the camera feed. What I saw made my stomach drop. The camera was showing the hallway, and someone was standing there. A tall figure, completely still, right at the edge of the frame. The camera's night vision made everything look pale and washed out, but I could clearly see the outline of a person. They were facing the camera, but I was sitting only a few feet away in the same room. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway. There was no one there. I looked back at the camera feed. The figure was still standing in the hallway, not moving, just watching. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone and slowly stood up, keeping my eyes on the hallway. Still empty. But on the camera feed, the figure took one slow step forward, then another. I backed away toward the front door. The camera showed the figure walking slowly into the living room, walking toward me, walking toward the camera. Except in real life, the room was still empty. When the figure reached the center of the room on the video feed, it stopped. Then it leaned forward slightly, like it was trying to look directly into the lens. My phone suddenly buzzed again, another motion alert, but this one came from the driveway camera. I opened the clip. It showed my front door opening and me running outside. The problem was, I hadn't opened the door yet. I was still standing in the living room staring at my phone. That's when I heard the sound behind me. A slow footstep inside the house, right where the camera said the figure was standing. I grabbed my keys and ran out the front door without looking back. I didn't return to that house that night. The next day, I went back with a friend to collect my things. Before leaving, I checked the camera app one last time. The living room camera had recorded another clip at 2:18 a.m. It showed the figure standing alone in the room, looking directly at the camera. Then it slowly pointed toward the front door, exactly where I had been standing moments earlier.
A few years ago, I had to travel for work pretty often, and most of the time the company would just book whatever cheap hotel was close to the job site. I didn't really care where I stayed as long as it had a bed and a shower. Usually, I'd check in late, sleep for a few hours, then leave early the next morning. One night, I arrived at this small hotel just outside a quiet highway town. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the place looked almost empty. The parking lot had maybe 3 or 4 cars, and the lobby lights were dim, like they were already preparing to close things down for the night. When I walked inside, there was just one guy behind the front desk. He looked tired, like he had been working the late shift for a while. I gave him my name, and he pulled up the reservation pretty quickly. While he was handing me the key card, he said, "You're in room 417. Then he paused for a moment, like he wanted to say something else. Right before I walked toward the elevator, he added, "If you hear anything strange tonight, just ignore it." At first, I thought he was joking, like maybe he was trying to make the place seem mysterious or something. I even laughed a little. But he didn't laugh. He just went back to looking at his computer. That made the comment stick in my mind more than it probably should have. Still, I didn't think too much about it. Hotels always make weird noises at night, people walking around, doors closing, pipes in the walls. I figured that's what he meant. The elevator ride up was slow and quiet. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the lobby lights were noticeably dimmer than the lobby. The entire floor felt empty. Not just quiet, but like no one had been there in a while. There were about 10 rooms on the floor, spread along a long hallway with faded carpet and those old wall lamps that barely lit the place. I walked down to my room, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room looked normal enough. A bed, a desk, a TV mounted on the wall. Nothing seemed out of place. I took a shower, checked a few emails, and eventually laid down to sleep. Sometime later that night, I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't even know what woke me. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow footsteps walking down the hallway outside my room. They were very clear because the floor was so quiet. Step. 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 It sounded like someone walking slowly along the carpet. I figured it was just another guest heading to their room, so I tried to ignore it. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept going, back and forth, from one end of the hallway to the other, then back again. It sounded like whoever it was kept pacing the entire hallway. After a few minutes, I checked my phone. 2:12 a.m. The footsteps continued. Sometimes they would get closer to my door, then fade away toward the other end of the hallway again. It went on for so long that I started getting annoyed more than anything. At one point, the footsteps came all the way down the hallway and stopped right outside my door. I could hear someone standing there, not moving, just standing on the other side of the door. I sat up in bed and waited. Part of me thought they might knock or try to open the wrong room by mistake. but nothing happened. About 30 seconds later, the footsteps started again, slowly walking away. Eventually, the sound faded down the hallway and everything went quiet again. I must have fallen asleep after that. The next morning, I packed my things and went downstairs to check out. The same receptionist from the night before was still behind the desk. While he was processing my checkout, I casually mentioned the footsteps in the hallway. I said something like, "Hey, someone was pacing the 4th floor all night. You might want to check on that." The receptionist looked up at me immediately. "You were on the 4th floor?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Room 417. He stared at the computer screen for a moment, then slowly looked back at me. "That floor is closed right now." At first, I thought he meant maybe certain rooms were under maintenance or something. But then he explained. About 2 weeks earlier, a pipe had burst on that floor and caused water damage in several rooms. Because of that, the hotel had temporarily shut down the entire 4th floor while repairs were being scheduled. No guests were supposed to be staying there. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but then he turned the monitor toward me. The hotel system showed a list of rooms. Every single room on the 4th floor was labeled out of service, except one, room 417. Mine. I told him that didn't make any sense because someone clearly was walking in the hallway. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair and rubbed his eyes. Then he said something that made the entire situation worse. "You're the 3rd person this month who told me that." I asked what he meant. He explained that before the floor was officially closed, 2 other guests had stayed up there during the week the pipe burst. Both of them came down during the night to complain about the exact same thing. Footsteps pacing the hallway outside their room. For hours. I asked if the hotel checked the security cameras. He nodded slowly. They did. "And?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "The hallway camera covers the entire 4th floor. There was no one there. The camera footage showed the hallway exactly as it should have been. Empty. But according to the timestamps, the footsteps the guests reported happened at the exact same time the camera was recording." I didn't really know how to respond to that. I grabbed my bag and headed toward the door. Right before I left, the receptionist said one more thing. "Did the footsteps stop outside your door at any point?" I stopped and turned around. "Yeah," I said. "How did you know that?" He looked down at the desk before answering. "That's what the other 2 guests said too." Then he added something quietly. "They said it sounded like whoever it was listening through the door." A few years ago, I used to work late shifts at a small office in the city. Because of the hours, I always took the last train home. It left around midnight, and by that time, most people had already gone home, so the train was usually almost empty. At first, I liked it. It was quiet. No crowds, no noise, just the sound of the train moving through the tunnels. One night after work, I got to the station a little earlier than usual. The platform was completely empty except for one man sitting at the far end on a bench. He had his head down like he was staring at his phone. I didn't think much of it. When the train arrived, I got into one of the middle cars and sat near the window. I noticed the same man from the platform enter the train too, but he walked toward the back car. Once the doors closed, the train started moving. The first few minutes were normal. I just sat there looking at my phone while the train passed through a few stations. Hardly anyone got on or off. Then something strange happened. At the next stop, I looked up and noticed the man from earlier walking through my train car. He moved slowly down the aisle, not looking at anyone, just walking. But instead of sitting down, he walked into the next car. Again, I didn't think much about it, but a few minutes later, he walked through my car again, from the same direction, which didn't make sense. The train had been moving the entire time. There was no way he could have looped around without passing me first. I told myself I must have been mistaken. Maybe it was just another passenger who looked similar. But at the next station, it happened again. The same man walked through my car. Same hoodie, same slow walk, same blank expression. This time I paid closer attention. He walked into the next car again and disappeared. I waited. About 30 seconds later, he came back from the same direction. My stomach dropped. There was only one door connecting the cars. I had been staring directly at it the entire time. He never passed through. But somehow, he kept appearing. At this point, the train was almost empty. There were maybe 2 other passengers far down the car, and they didn't seem to notice anything strange. Then the man walked past me again. But this time, when he passed my seat, he stopped. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were wide open, and he said something very quietly. "Don't get off at the next stop." Then he kept walking. I sat there frozen. My stop was the next one. I kept thinking about what he said. Was it some kind of joke, a warning, or was he just messing with me? The train slowed down as it approached the station. The doors opened. I stood up, but I didn't move. Something about the way he said it didn't feel like a joke, so I stayed on the train. The doors closed again, and the train continued moving. About 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a local news alert. Breaking: police responding to incident at Central Station. That was the stop I was supposed to get off at. Later that night, I found out what happened. Someone had pushed a passenger onto the tracks just seconds after the doors opened, right at the exact door I normally used. The police never found the person responsible, and I never saw that man on the train again. But sometimes I still think about something that bothers me. When I first saw him on the platform, he looked like he was staring at his phone. But when he passed me on the train, I realized something. He wasn't holding one.
A few years ago, I used to work as a delivery driver. Most of my shifts ended really late, sometimes around 2 or 3 in the morning. Because of that, I'd usually stop somewhere to grab a drink or a snack before driving home. One night, after finishing a long shift, I stopped at a gas station just outside the city. It was one of those old stations that had a small convenience store attached to it. The lights were on, but the place looked almost completely empty. There was only one car in the parking lot. I parked near the entrance and walked up to the door, but when I tried to open it, it was locked. That was strange, because the sign clearly said open 24 hours. I knocked on the glass, thinking maybe the cashier was in the back room. A few seconds later, a man appeared behind the counter. He looked nervous, like really nervous. Instead of unlocking the door, he quickly walked toward the window and started waving his hands at me. At first, I thought he was telling me the store was closed, but then I noticed something. He wasn't waving me inside, he was shaking his head and pointing behind me. I turned around. The parking lot was empty. The only car there was mine. Confused, I looked back at the cashier. Now he was gesturing more urgently, pointing again behind me. That's when I heard it. A slow, crunching sound, like someone walking across gravel right behind me. I slowly turned around again. Standing near the side of the building, maybe 20 feet away, was a man I hadn't noticed before. He was just standing there, completely still, watching me. The weird thing was, the gas station lights were really bright, but somehow his face was in shadow. I couldn't see his eyes. I looked back at the cashier,
Now he was frantically pointing toward my car. Then he made a motion like he was locking a door. That's when it clicked. He wasn't trying to get me inside. He was telling me to leave immediately. I walked slowly toward my car, trying not to show that I was nervous. The whole time I could feel the man watching me. As soon as I got in the driver's seat, I locked the doors and started the engine. Out of instinct, I looked in the rearview mirror. The man was already walking toward my car, fast, way faster than before. I hit reverse and backed out of the parking spot as quickly as I could. When I looked again, he had stopped in the middle of the lot, just standing there again, watching. I drove off and didn't look back. About 10 minutes later, I stopped at another gas station closer to the highway. While I was inside paying, I mentioned what happened to the cashier there. He looked at me for a second and then asked something that made my stomach drop. "Was that the old station near Mill Road?" I said yes. He just shook his head. That place keeps having problems. Apparently, over the past few months, several people had reported a man approaching cars late at night in that same parking lot. No one knew what he wanted, but every single person who reported it said the same thing. He never tried to stop them from leaving. He just stood there, watching them drive away, like he was waiting to see if they'd make the mistake of staying.